There are 14 demigods in Elden Ring, each carrying a piece of a shattered god, a broken family, and a world that was never quite as golden as it claimed to be. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. So here is why I made this video. I have spent a genuinely embarrassing number of hours reading item descriptions, cross-referencing NPC dialogue, and watching the same cutscenes over and over just to piece together who these characters actually are. Elden Ring does not hand you its story, it buries it. And I wanted to make something that felt less like a lecture and more like sitting down and having someone walk you through it all at a comfortable pace. When I was assembling this, I made the choice to order the demigods not by how you encounter them in the game, but by their connections to each other and to the Erdtree. That meant starting with Marika and working outward through her children and consorts rather than jumping around the map. I also kept the philosophy light. This is lore, not a theology dissertation. I want you to understand these characters, maybe even feel something for some of them, and then fall asleep. So let us begin. Marika, the Eternal. To understand any of the demigods, you have to start with their mother. Marika the Eternal is the god at the center of everything. She is the vessel of the Elden Ring, the one who gave the Golden Order its shape, and the one whose decisions, over centuries, eventually tore the world apart. But she was not born a god. The lore suggests she came from the Newmen, a people from outside the lands between, who were said to be close to the root of the Erdtree. She found her way to power through a complicated and brutal relationship with the Erdtree itself, and through her connection to the Two Fingers, the messengers of the greater will, the outer god whose influence shaped the world's laws. Marika became empress and vessel. She took Godfrey as her first consort, a warrior of tremendous power, and together they waged war across the lands between to spread the Golden Order and make it the dominant faith and law of the world. When Godfrey had served his purpose, Marika stripped him of his grace and sent him away from the lands between entirely. He became the first of the tarnished, exiled and separated from the light of the Erdtree. This act was not cruelty for its own sake, or at least that is one possible reading. Some interpretations suggest Marika was already beginning to question the greater will. That she sent Godfrey away not to discard him, but to set a plan in motion that she could not yet complete alone. After Godfrey, she took Radahn as her second consort. And here is where the lore becomes one of the most unusual details in the entire game. Radahn and Marika are the same person. They share a body. When Marika is absent from the physical world, Radahn is present. The item descriptions and NPC dialogue only point toward this conclusion rather than spelling it out cleanly, and it raises more questions than it answers. Was Radahn a separate identity that Marika created? Was he always part of her? Did they agree on everything? The available lore suggests they did not. Marika seems to have moved against the Elden Ring deliberately. Radahn, meanwhile, appears to have tried to repair it. Two wills in one body, pulling in opposite directions. What we know is that Marika, at some point, shattered the Elden Ring. She broke it into pieces called the Great Runes, and those runes were distributed among her children and descendants. This event is called the Shattering. It broke the Golden Order, it threw the lands between into chaos, and it started a war among the demigods. Marika was imprisoned within the Erdtree after this, frozen inside the Elden Throne, suspended there as punishment, or as preservation depending on how you read it. And the world has been broken ever since. Her children would go on to become the bosses and figures you encounter throughout the game. Each of them carries something of her in them. Some of her ambition, some of her grief, some of her power, and almost none of them are simply villains. Godwyn the Golden. Before the Shattering, before the war, there was Godwyn. He is called the Golden because he embodied everything the Golden Order was supposed to represent. He was beloved. He was a warrior who chose mercy. There is a story told about him encountering the dragon Fortisax in battle. Rather than killing him, Godwyn offered the dragon friendship. Fortisax accepted. That kind of gesture, choosing connection over conquest, is the detail that makes Godwyn stand out from almost every other figure in this lore. He was Marika and Godfrey's son. He was the firstborn. And he was the first to die. The Knight of the Black Knives was an assassination carried out using blades that had been imbued with a fragment of the Rune of Death. Death itself had been removed from the world by Marika, sealed away so that those who died could simply be returned to the Erdtree and reborn. The Black Knives used daggers that carried actual death, real permanent death, and they used them on Godwyn. But something went wrong, or something was planned to go wrong, depending on your reading. Godwyn's soul was killed, but his body was not. His flesh remained alive without his spirit. And because it was still alive, it began to spread. It grew roots beneath the lands between. It reached out under Stormvale Castle, into the depths of Deeproot Depths, and it became something called the Prince of Death. His body is massive now, ancient, a bloated, root-like horror beneath the earth, and he has no awareness left. He is alive in the most terrible, empty sense of the word. The question the lore points toward is who ordered the Black Knives assassination. The daggers were made from Marika's own rune. Someone with access to that power was involved. One possible reading is that Ranni the Witch orchestrated it, which is something we will come to when we reach her. But the motives behind the Knight of the Black Knives are layered, and different characters had different reasons for wanting death to return to the world. Godwyn matters because he represents what was lost. The game is full of broken, ambitious, monstrous figures. He is the one who could have been different. His death is the first crack in the Golden Order, the moment where everything that followed became possible. Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon. Rennala was not born into the Golden Order. She was already powerful when Radahn arrived at the Academy of Raya Lucaria. She was the head of the Academy, a sorceress of extraordinary ability, and she was the master of a form of magic that drew on the moon rather than the Erdtree. This is worth noting because Raya Lucaria and the Erdtree were not always aligned. The Academy represented a different tradition, a different source of power. When Radahn came to the Academy, ostensibly as a conqueror, what happened instead was that he and Rennala fell in love. They married. They had 3 children, Radahn, Rykard, and Ranni. Then Radahn left. He was called back by Marika, and he returned to become her consort again, which means he was always her consort, since they share a body. Rennala was abandoned. The item descriptions suggest she fell apart. She was found in a state of grief so deep it had become something closer to madness, clutching a tiny amber egg, a gift that Radahn had given her. Her students, the students she had once led and inspired, began to mock her. They rebelled against her. When you find Rennala in the game, she is in the great library of the Academy, surrounded by those students who have now become her devoted followers again. Children, essentially, carrying candles and singing. She is fragile. She is suspended in a kind of delusion, believing she can use the amber egg to give birth to a new perfect child using her great rune. She is not aggressive. She is not trying to take over anything. She is sitting in her grief. Her great rune is the Rune of Unmaking, which allows rebirth. It is the mechanic the player uses to respect their character. But within the lore, it is Rennala's attempt to fill the hole Radahn left. She keeps trying to remake things, to fix what broke. What makes Rennala one of the more quietly devastating figures in the game is how clearly everything she does points toward loss. She had something real. She had the Academy, she had her research, she had a family, and then the man she loved was revealed to be a fragment of a god who was always going to leave. Her 3 children grew up and scattered into their own fates. She was left alone with a small egg and a fading light. After you defeat her, she does not die. She sits peacefully in the library. You can return to her throughout the game, and she will offer her services. She refers to you as a student. She seems calm. Whether that calm is peace or simply the absence of enough awareness to feel pain is something the lore leaves open. Radahn, Starscourge. Radahn is the son of Radagon and Rennala. He is enormous. He is one of the most physically powerful beings in the lands between. He worshipped his father Godfrey, who was actually his stepfather, Marika's first consort, the great warrior king. He trained himself into something beyond human scale, to the point where his own body became so massive that only his horse Leonard could carry him, and over the years Leonard has grown with him, trained alongside him, and still carries him even now, even though the horse is clearly too small, and the image of a colossal general riding a tiny pony across. A battlefield is, if nothing else, one of the game's more unexpected details. Radahn studied gravity magic at Raya Lucaria. He did not study under his mother's lunar tradition. He chose gravity, the power to hold things in place, to pull and anchor. And he used this magic in one of the most significant acts any demigod performed. He held the stars in place. The lore suggests that certain stars, if left unchecked, would move, and their movement would have consequences for the world. Radahn used his gravity magic to anchor them in their positions. He did this for decades. He kept the stars from falling. And the cost of this was that he never left Caelid. He stationed himself there, and the battle with Malenia eventually came to him. Malenia is the daughter of Marika and Radagon, and we will reach her soon. The clash between her and Radahn is called the Battle of Aeonia, and it ended in a kind of mutual catastrophe. Malenia released the Scarlet Rot, the corruption that defines her, and it consumed Radahn. It consumed Caelid. The entire region became a wasteland of red dust and rot. And Radahn lost his mind. He went feral. He still fights on his battlefield, still charges at anything that moves, but there is nothing left of the general who held the stars in place. He has been reduced to hunger and motion. The Festival of Radahn in the game is a celebration in name only. It is actually an invitation for warriors to come and attempt to kill him, to give him a worthy death. The soldiers who still follow him, the ones camped at Redmane Castle, they are not celebrating a victory. They are mourning what he became while trying to honour what he was. Radahn held the stars still because one of those stars, when released, would carry Ranni's dark moon down to the world and allow her plan to move forward. His resistance to that was indirect, but it meant that for as long as Radahn lived and fought, certain things could not happen. His defeat in the game is not just a boss kill. It is the unlocking of a sequence of events in the world. There is something in Radahn's arc that points toward a particular kind of tragedy. He was never small. He was never petty. He was enormous in every sense, physically, in his ambitions, in his loyalty. And what broke him was not something he chose. He was infected by a force his body could not resist, and he has been suffering in Caelid ever since, neither dead nor healed, just endlessly fighting in a rotting wasteland on a horse that loves him. Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy. Rykard is the other son of Radagon and Rennala. Where Radahn was enormous and martial, Rykard was philosophical and deeply, deliberately transgressive. He was a demigod who decided that the gods were wrong, not just the greater will, not just the Elden Ring's specific laws, but the entire framework of divine authority that kept the demigods and their subjects in their assigned places. He founded the Volcano Manor. He gathered together assassins, outcasts, hunters of the other demigods, people who had rejected the Golden Order or been rejected by it. He called them his family. He offered them a purpose that was not worship, but something more like revenge. And then he fed himself to the god-devouring serpent. The lore around this is one of the more unsettling corners of the game. The serpent was ancient, a creature that predated the Erdtree's dominance, and Rykard appears to have allowed it to consume him, or fused with it willingly, as part of a plan to consume the gods themselves. The resulting entity, half Rykard, half serpent, sits in the depths of Volcano Manor and describes its intentions openly when you face it. It wants to devour the gods. It wants to consume divine power until it can no longer be ignored or dismissed. Whether this was a coherent political project or something that had already consumed whatever remained of Rykard's original mind is something the lore only gestures toward. What is interesting about Rykard is that his followers, the ones who remain at Volcano Manor even after his death, do not seem to have been deceived. They knew what they were signing up for. Lady Tanith, who runs the manor in Rykard's name, is devoted and specific about it. She is not a cultist who was manipulated. She made a choice, and after Rykard dies, she goes down to the chamber where his corpse lies and she begins to eat it. The implication is that she intends to carry on his mission in her own body. It is one of the more quietly horrifying endings to an NPC questline in the game. Rykard's blasphemy, his rejection of the Golden Order and everything it demanded, is presented without the game fully condemning it. The Golden Order was a system that served some people and crushed others. Rykard's methods were grotesque, but the lore at least suggests that his grievances had a foundation. He saw clearly what the divine hierarchy cost, and he decided he wanted no part of it, even if what he chose instead was monstrous in its own way. Ranni the Witch. Ranni is the daughter of Radagon and Rennala, the sister of Radahn and Rykard. She is also one of the most significant figures in the entire game, and her questline is widely considered the most complete narrative arc available to the player. She appears early. She visits you in a dream before you even reach the first sight of grace. She asks for your service. Most players assume she is a minor character and move on. She is not. Ranni is a witch who removed her own soul from her original body at a young age. She now inhabits a small doll-like body, blue and cold and a little unsettling. Her original body, which she refers to only in the third person, is dead. The lore suggests she did this deliberately to escape the fate the Two Fingers, the servants of the Greater Will, had planned for her. That fate was to become a lord, to ascend, to take power through the Elden Ring system, to become a god within its structure. Ranni did not want this. She did not want to serve the Greater Will's purpose. So she left. She is connected to the Knight of the Black Knives. The daggers used to kill Godwyn were made from Marika's Rune of Death. One possible reading is that Ranni was involved in acquiring or commissioning those daggers. On the same night Godwyn's soul was killed, Ranni's soul was also cut away from her body. She used the moment of chaos, the moment when death was briefly in the world again, to sever herself from her fate. Godwyn died fully in spirit. Ranni survived, but not as what she was meant to be. What she wants, and what her entire questline works toward, is a different kind of order. She seeks an Empyrean's path outside the Greater Will's influence. There is a moon, a dark moon, connected to her mother Rennala's lunar tradition. Ranni wants to bring this moon into the world and use it to establish a new law of the world, one outside the Erdtree's dominion. An order defined by the cold light of the moon rather than the warmth of the Erdtree. An order based on, as the law puts it, the distant love of stars. Something colder and more honest, perhaps. Something that does not demand that everyone be the same. Her questline involves you finding her servant Blade, who is a half-wolf warrior bound to Ranni by design. Blade's entire purpose was to serve Ranni, and then, when the Two Fingers decided she had gone too far, to turn on her and destroy her. Blade fights this fate. He spends the questline struggling against what he was made to be. He loses, in the end. He is found outside Ranni's tower, his mind gone, attacking everything. You have to kill him. He cannot be saved. But the fact that he fought it, that he knew what was being done to him and resisted anyway, is one of the more affecting character details in a game full of them. Ranni is cold. She is precise. She addresses you as her consort if you follow her path to its end, and the relationship has an odd tenderness to it, restrained but present. She is not performing warmth. She offers something real in the only way she knows how, at a distance, through purpose, through trust. When her ending is achieved, she ascends and the world changes, and she thanks you simply, without ceremony. Malenia, Blade of Miquella. Malenia is arguably the most famous boss in the game. She is also one of the most tragic figures in the lore. She is the daughter of Marika and Radahn, the twin sister of Miquella. She was born cursed. The scarlet rot lives inside her, has always lived inside her, a divine disease that eats and transforms everything it touches. Her body has fought this her entire life. She has lost her arm. She has lost her eye. She has replaced these with prosthetics, and she keeps fighting, not because she is unaware of what is inside her, but because fighting is all that has ever been available to her. She is called a Blade, because she became Miquella's protector. Everything she has ever done has been in service of her brother. She is ferociously capable, one of the greatest warriors in the history of the lands between, and she poured every bit of that capability into keeping Miquella safe. The irony is that Miquella was taken from her anyway, in a way she could not prevent through martial skill. The Battle of Aeonia, which destroyed Radahn and Caelid, was Malenia unleashing the rot in a moment of genuine desperation. She was losing. Radahn was too strong. And so the scarlet rot bloomed, consuming the land, consuming Radahn's mind, consuming whatever the region had been before. She won. Technically. But she collapsed after. She fell into a dormant state, protected by her cleanrot knights, waiting in the Halictree, waiting to recover. The Halictree itself is a project of Miquella's, a sacred tree grown outside the Erdtree system, intended to be a place of healing. He grew it hoping it could eventually cure Malenia. He never got to finish it. Malenia's boss fight has two phases. In the second phase, she becomes something new. She calls it her true form, a flowering of the rot, vast and terrible. She has wings of golden scarlet. She looks, in some ways, like the Erdtree itself has been infected. One possible reading is that this form is not what she wants, but what she becomes when she is pushed far enough. That the rot is always there, and she spends her entire existence managing how much of it she allows to exist in the world. Her dialogue during the fight includes lines about never having lost in combat. And that is true in the lore. She has never been defeated. The player defeating her is, within the fiction of the game, an unprecedented event. What makes her more than just a difficult boss is the context. She did not choose any of this. She did not choose the rot. She did not choose to be Miquella's guardian, exactly, though her devotion seems genuine. She was born into a role that cost her everything, and she played it completely. Miquella the Unalloyed. Miquella is perhaps the most enigmatic of the demigods. He is present in the game, mostly through his absence, through what he built and what others say about him, through the husk of his body still sleeping in a golden cocoon inside. Mog's Palace. He was born, like Malenia, cursed. His curse was that he could never grow up. His body was forever that of a child. He had extraordinary power, perhaps the most naturally gifted of all Marika's children, but he was trapped in a form that the world would not take seriously. His response to this was to work. He grew Halictree. He developed a new golden needle technique, a way of temporarily suppressing outer god influence. He tried to create systems of healing outside what the Erd Tree offered. He is described repeatedly in item descriptions as uniquely capable of love. A love that compels, that draws people to him involuntarily. Several characters across the game, Mog, Ansbach, the Knight Loretta, were all drawn to Miquella in ways they could not fully explain or resist. Whether this is a supernatural quality or simply the effect of an extraordinary person is something the lore suggests without resolving. He entered his golden cocoon voluntarily. He was attempting to shed his curse, to grow up, to cross a threshold that would let him become what he needed to be. He never made it. Mog broke in, found him half transformed, and took him, carried him to the underground palace that Molg had built in his name. Molg believed Miquella loved him in return. Every indication in the lore points toward this being a profound misreading of the situation. Miquella's partial transformation had left him in a kind of stupor, and what remained of his consciousness was, according to the Elden Ring DLC, in the process of trying to cut away his love, to become fully unalloyed, to shed the softness that made him vulnerable. The Shadow of the Erd Tree expansion focuses on Miquella's trail through a shadow realm, a reflection of the lands between connected to Marika's past. Miquella, now somewhat more grown and deeply altered by what he chose to do to himself, has gathered followers to enact a plan whose full shape only becomes clear at the end of the DLC. He is trying to become a god on his own terms. And the version of him that pursues this is colder and stranger than the gentle figure the item descriptions describe. Miquella is interesting precisely because so much of what we know about him comes from second-hand accounts. People who loved him, people who followed him, people who projected onto him. The lore asks you to consider how much of what these characters believed was real, and how much was shaped by his unusual ability to inspire devotion. Mog, Lord of Blood. Mog is the son of Marika and Godfrey, the twin brother of Morgott. He was born underground, in the subterranean shunning grounds, hidden beneath Lendel, the capital. He was born with a bloody deformity, something that marked him as wrong within the Golden Order's framework, and he was imprisoned there. He found a different patron. The formless mother, an outer god of blood, heard him in his prison and answered. She gave him power over blood. She gave him ambition. And he eventually broke out, built a dynasty underground, and declared himself the Lord of Blood. His obsession with Miquella is one of the stranger corners of the lore. He stole Miquella's cocoon and installed it in his palace as the centerpiece of a ceremony designed to make Miquella into a god and himself into a consort of that god. He genuinely believed Miquella chose this. He believed Miquella's dormant state was peace. The letters he wrote, found in item descriptions, are not the letters of someone who knows they are doing something wrong. They are letters of devotion, which makes them deeply uncomfortable to read. His twin brother Morgott is the opposite of him in almost every way, and we will reach Morgott next. Mog's location in the game, in his underground palace past a river of blood, surrounded by his followers, with Miquella's golden arm visible emerging from the cocoon, is one of the more visually striking environments in a game that has many of them. The scale of what he built in the name of his belief is not nothing. It just rests on a foundation of delusion and violence. Morgott, the Omen King. Morgott is the other twin, also born in the Shunning Grounds, also marked as an omen. He is technically the same kind of creature as Mog, born with a deformity the Golden Order considered a curse. But his response to this was entirely different. Morgott became the defender of Lendel. He took on a disguise, calling himself Margit, the Fell Omen, and he positioned himself in various locations throughout the lands between to repel Tarnished who came seeking thee. Elden Ring. He was not doing this because he was ordered to. He was doing it because he believed in the Golden Order. He believed in the Erd Tree. He defended the institution that imprisoned him, that treated his birth as a defect, because he believed in what it represented, even if it would never accept him. This is one of the most specific and quietly devastating character arcs in the game. Morgott does not disguise his inner life. When you defeat him in Lendel, he speaks to you directly, and there is an exhaustion in what he says. He tells you that the Erd Tree will never allow you to claim the throne. He tells you it is all in vain. He is not threatening. He is almost resigned. He fought everything he had, in service of a power that would never have welcomed him at its table, and he lost. He calls Marika his mother only once, in item descriptions, rather than dialogue. The whole relationship, this devotion to a parent who considered him a shame, is something the lore presents without commentary. It does not explain it, it just shows you the shape of it and lets you sit with it. His omen horns, the deformity he was born with, are tied to something old and wild and outside the Erd Tree's order. The omens in the Shunning Grounds are not monsters in any simple sense. They are people the system did not have a place for. Morgott is the one who decided to defend that system anyway. Godrick the Grafted. Godrick is the first major boss most players encounter. He is also, in the context of the full Demigod roster, the most straightforwardly pathetic. He is a descendant of Godwyn, part of the Golden lineage, but a distant and weak one. He does not have the same natural power as Marika's direct children. He has spent his life being aware of this inadequacy and responding to it with increasingly desperate measures. He began grafting. He cut limbs from people and attached them to his own body. Arms, legs, heads, torsos, he kept adding to himself, covering his own frame with stolen parts in an attempt to become powerful through accumulation. His castle, Stormvale, is full of people he has captured and intends to graft. He is surrounded by grafted soldiers. He has grafted a dragon's arm onto himself as his second phase. Everything about him is the same gesture repeated, the belief that if he just adds enough, he will finally be enough. The lore does not suggest much interiority beyond this. He is not pursuing a philosophy. He is not enacting a plan for the world. He is scared. He was always lesser within his family, and he found the most grotesque possible response to that fear. There is a line in his introduction where he speaks about being a great champion of the Golden Order, and the gap between his self-image and his reality is so wide it almost becomes sad. Almost. He is interesting, precisely because he is small, in the way some of the other demigods are not. Next to Ranni's careful long game, or Radahn's tragic decline, Godrick is just a bully, who is afraid of being weak. The game gives him a genuinely spectacular boss arena, and then reveals him to be the least of all of them. Morgott being the gatekeeper, and Godrick being the first gate, is a structural choice the game makes, and the contrast is worth noting. Morgott, who had every reason to resent everything, chose devotion. Godrick, who had relative comfort and lineage, chose cruelty. Placid Usax and the ancient dragons. Before the Erd Tree, before Marika, before the Golden Order existed, there was a different god and a different order. Elden Beast lore and the item descriptions around the ancient dragons suggest that the world once had a different Elden Lord, a different structure entirely, and that Placid Usax was that Lord's consort. He was, or the lore suggests he was, an Elden Lord chosen by a god who then fled the world. The god abandoned everything, and Placid Usax stayed. He waited in the place where the god had been, called Farum Azula, a crumbling ruin suspended in a storm above the world, and he kept waiting, for an eternity. The god never returned. Placid Usax has two heads because he once had more. The item description for the remembrance you get from defeating him says he was a lord from the age before the Elden Ring, as it now exists, and that he waited eternally for his. God to return. The number of heads he once had is not given. What we have now is two, facing two different directions, perhaps still searching. He is the oldest of the boss-tier entities in the game. Fighting him requires going through Farum Azula, which is itself one of the stranger locations. The ruins are not in the world exactly. They float. They are clearly ancient, predating everything you have encountered. The crumbled dragon civilization, the structures built at a scale, meant for creatures far larger than humans, the wind that never stops, all of it points towards something that was complete and whole a very long time ago. Placid Usax does not have dialogue. He does not speak. He fights with lightning and with time, distorting the arena around himself. One possible reading of his time manipulation in the fight is that he has spent so long waiting, outside of normal time, that time itself has become something he exists alongside, rather than within. There is a quality to his boss fight that the game's other fights do not quite have. Most of the demigods fight you with ambition, or desperation, or grief. Placid Usax fights you with something that feels more like ritual. He is not angry at you. He is perhaps not capable of anger anymore. He has been waiting for so long that everything has become simply the next thing he must move through. Malekith the Black Blade. Malekith is Marika's shadow. He is not her child. He is something she created or chose, a half-wolf warrior like Blade, but older and closer to her centre. He was made to be the guardian of the Rune of Death, the piece of death that Marika had sealed away. When Marika removed death from the world, she needed somewhere to put it. Malekith carries it. He carries it in his black blade, and the blade's attacks do not simply deal damage. They shave off maximum health. They diminish the very life force of what they cut. The implication is that he deals something like actual death to his targets. He is found in Farum Azula, which is already the realm of the ancient dragon Placid Usax, and his presence there adds to the sense that Farum Azula is a place of things that predate or exist outside the normal order. He is enormous. He moves with a kind of violence that does not seem to have any restraint in it. He is not a character in the way Morgott is a character. He is a function, a purpose given form. Before he is Malekith, he appears as the beast clergyman, hunched and strange, apparently examining the bones of the dead. His disguise is not a costume. He seems genuinely more calm in this form, more contained. When he transforms, when he becomes Malekith, it is a sudden explosion of scale and intention. The lore around Marika's shadow bodyguards, the Black Knife assassins, and the events of the Night of the Black Knives circles around the question of who had access to the rune of death. The daggers used on Godwyn carried a piece of it. Someone took a fragment from Malekith's safekeeping, or from wherever the rune was stored, and made weapons from it. Whether Malekith failed in his duty, or was deceived, or was somehow complicit, is something the lore does not clearly resolve. What Malekith represents within the lore is the weight of death as a contained thing. The world without death sounds like a gift. What the lore suggests instead is that it became a prison. The dead could not leave. They accumulated at the base of the Erd Tree. They went hollow. They waited. The Erd Tree was consuming the world's dead and returning them in diminished form, and there was no escape from this cycle. Death, real death, finality, was gone, and Malekith was the lock on the box that held it. Godfrey, first Elden Lord. We return to Godfrey at the end, though he was mentioned at the beginning. He is Marika's first consort, the father of Godwyn and Morgott and Mohg. He was the first Elden Lord, meaning he was the human warrior chosen to sit beside Marika and extend the Golden Order's reach through conquest. His story within the lore is mostly before the game. He fought wars across the lands between, established the Golden Order's dominance, subdued everyone who opposed it. He was a warrior of extraordinary scale. His axe, Godslayer's greatsword adjacent in name at least, the weapon he carried, points towards something close to divinity in its own right. When Marika sent him away, stripping him of his grace, he became the first tarnished. He left with his warriors, and they wandered the world outside the lands between for generations. They found battles wherever they could. Godfrey himself killed a great lion, and its spirit fused with him, becoming Serosh, the creature on his back, who had been trying to temper his battle lust so that he could be a king rather than only a warrior. He returns in the game as both a golden ghost in Lendl, a memory of who he was, and as himself in the Erdtree's final chamber. He is one of the last things standing between the player and Marika. His return was prophesied. The tarnished, exiles like him, were always going to be called back when the Erdtree needed a new lord. He came back willingly. He is not confused about any of it. He knows exactly who he is and what this moment is. When you defeat him, he congratulates you. Not sarcastically, not as a formality. He seems genuinely pleased. He wanted a fight worthy of his return. He wanted to test whoever was going to claim what he once held. There is no grief in him when he falls. This is worth noting, because so many of the other demigods die in states of incompletion. Radahn with his mind gone. Morgott with his exhausted devotion. Godwyn without his soul. Godfrey dies with everything resolved. He was great, he was exiled, he came back, he fought well, and he lost to someone greater. For him, that is enough. His arc within the law's larger framework points toward a specific kind of tragedy that only reveals itself slowly. He was used by Marika to build the Golden Order, and then discarded so she could move forward with a different phase of her plan. He accepted this because he believed in her, or because he had no choice, or both. The lore suggests he and Marika still had something between them, something not fully severed even across all the centuries of exile, but it also suggests that Marika's plans were always larger than any single person, including him. The Elden Beast. At the centre of the Erdtree, after everything, after Marika and Godfrey and all the demigods and all the runes, there is the Elden Beast. It is not a god in the sense that the other figures are. It is the vessel of the Elden Ring itself, the physical form of the law of the world as imposed by the greater will. It has no personality in any accessible sense. It is ancient, aquatic in its design, a creature of stars and deep time that found a home inside the Erdtree and became the container for divine law. The lore suggests that the Elden Beast arrived from the cosmos long before the events of the game. It brought the Elden Ring with it, or was created alongside it. It and Marika have a relationship that the game does not fully explain, but which is clearly not simple. She is its vessel. It is what she contains. When she is imprisoned in the Erdtree, it is the Elden Beast's power that holds her there. Fighting it after Radahn, in the golden light of the Erdtree's interior, has an overwhelming quality. Radahn was personal. He was the consort, the husband, the part of Marika that tried to repair what she broke. The Elden Beast is what that whole system was ultimately in service of, an outer god's tool, floating in golden light, not angry, not desperate, just executing its function. What the lore points toward is that the greater will is not benevolent. It is not malevolent either. It has preferences. It has a direction it wants the world to move in. The Golden Order, Marika, the Erdtree, all of it was in service of those preferences. When Marika shattered the Elden Ring, she was not just breaking a law, she was refusing a direction. Whether she had something better in mind, or simply could not bear to continue, is the question the game leaves entirely open. The different endings of the game are different answers to that question. The Elden Ring can be remade as it was. It can be remade with modifications. It can be unmade entirely. Ranni's ending removes it from the world completely and replaces its order with the cold, distant light of her moon. Each of these is a different response to the question of what the world should be governed by, if anything. The Elden Beast is the last obstacle in most of these endings because it is the thing defending the current answer. Not because it is evil. Because that is what it is. It is the law defending itself. A last look at the world. The demigods of Elden Ring are not villains in any simple taxonomy. They are the children and consorts of a god who broke the world, either to save it or because she could no longer sustain the lie of it being whole. They inherited pieces of what she shattered. They went to war over those pieces. They became monstrous, or remained human in diminished circumstances, or simply endured. Radahn held the stars in place for decades because he did not want the world to change in a way he could not control. Malenia spent her life managing a rot she was born with, for the sake of a brother she could not protect. Miquella tried to grow a tree outside the system, to build something that could heal what the system could not. Morgott defended the thing that imprisoned him. Godrick grafted other people's strength onto himself, because his own was never enough. Ranni walked out of her fate and built a new one. Each of them is a specific answer to the question of what you do when the world you were born into has already decided what you are and what you are worth. Some of them refused. Some of them complied. Some of them found a third option that was worse than either. The lands between is broken. It was always going to break. Marika made sure of that, whether intentionally or not, when she placed pieces of herself in children who were never going to agree on what to do with them. The Shattering was not just a political event, it was a family coming apart. And somewhere in the Erdtree, frozen in gold, a god waits to see what you will make of what is left. You said, continue for an additional 8 hours the same way continue for an additional 8 hours, the same way 1849 Claude responded. The Tarnished and the Grace, the Tarnished and Grace. Before we go deeper into the world and the figures that shaped it, it is worth spending some time with the concept that puts you, the player, in the middle of all of this. The Tarnished are not simply protagonists by default. They are a specific category of person within the lore, and understanding what they are changes how everything else lands. When Godfrey was exiled, he was the first, but he was not the last. Over the centuries that followed, others lost their grace as well. Grace is not simply a spiritual concept in the world of Elden Ring. It is tangible, it is visible. It is the golden light that trails from your character's back when a site of grace is nearby. To have grace is to be recognised by the Erdtree, to be within its system, to have a place in the order of things. To lose it is to be cast out. Not punished exactly, simply no longer acknowledged. The Tarnished who lost their grace were not all criminals. The lore suggests the loss of grace happened for various reasons, and that many of those reasons were not the person's fault. They were people the Erdtree's order no longer had a use for, or people who had somehow fallen outside the parameters of what the Golden Order could accommodate. They were sent away from the lands between, into the world beyond, where they wandered and fought, and died, and were reborn again, because the Erdtree's blessing of near immortality lingered even in exile. That near immortality is a critical detail. The Tarnished cannot die permanently. They keep returning. This is framed in the game as a gift, as the reason they are suited to the task of mending the Elden Ring. But the lore allows for a darker reading. The Tarnished were not kept alive out of affection. They were kept available. They were preserved, across generations, outside the lands between, waiting to be called back when the Erdtree needed instruments for a task too dangerous and too costly for anyone already inside the system. The call comes at the start of the game. Grace has returned to the Tarnished. They are being summoned back. The question of who issued that summons, the Two Fingers, the Erd Tree, Marika herself, in some indirect way, is something the lore leaves deliberately unclear. What is clear is that the Tarnished are not heroes in the traditional sense. They are tools that have been reactivated. What they do with that reactivation is the entire game. Your character has no fixed history. The lore does not tell you who you were before you lost your grace or what you did during the centuries of exile. This is partly a game design choice, allowing the player to project themselves onto the protagonist, but it also fits the lore thematically. The individual history of a given Tarnished does not matter. What matters is the capacity, the resilience, the willingness to keep going after dying again and again. The Tarnished are defined by endurance more than by origin. There are other Tarnished in the world when you arrive. Some have gone hollow, sitting motionless in ruins, having lost the will to continue. Some have allied themselves with the demigods. Some are pursuing their own agendas entirely. The range of what a Tarnished can become, from a hollow ruin to a new Elden Lord, is part of what the game is trying to say about agency within a system that did not design you. For comfort, the sites of grace are where the Tarnished rest and recover. They are also, interestingly, where the grace trails point. They gesture toward a direction, toward a next step, toward the path that the Erd Tree or the Two Fingers or whatever force is guiding this process wants you to follow. You can ignore them. The game allows for significant deviation, but they are always there, small golden arrows in the light, suggesting that someone or something has a plan for you. Whether you are an instrument of that plan or a disruption of it is ultimately the question every ending in the game answers differently. The Two Fingers and the Greater Will. The Two Fingers appear throughout the game as advisors and oracles. They are strange, large, pale, jointed appendages that communicate through an interpreter, a woman called Finger Reader, because the Two Fingers do not speak in a language most people can directly understand. They gesture, they signal, they express the will of the Greater Will downward through the chain of divine authority. There are multiple pairs of Two Fingers throughout the lands between. Each one serves a different Empyrean, one of the demigods who was identified as a potential new vessel for the Elden Ring. Marika herself was once guided by Two Fingers. Ranni had Two Fingers assigned to her, which is part of why her rejection of her fate was so significant. You cannot simply walk away from a god's attention without consequences. The Two Fingers represent a specific model of divine governance. Their authority comes from above, from the Greater Will, the outer god whose preferences the Elden Ring encodes into the world's laws. They do not explain themselves. They do not negotiate. They instruct. And they expect to be obeyed because the chain of authority runs from the Greater Will, through them to the Empyrean, to the world. To question any link in that chain is to question the whole structure. The lore around the Greater Will is deliberately sparse. We are not given a clear picture of what it is, what it wants beyond the maintenance of its order, or whether it is capable of anything resembling awareness of individual lives. It is an outer god, meaning it exists outside the world, influencing it from beyond through intermediaries like the Two Fingers and the Elden Beast. Its preferences are encoded in the Elden Ring, which encodes them into the laws of the world, which the Erd Tree enforces through its cycle of birth and death and rebirth. One possible reading of this entire structure is that it is a farming operation. The Greater Will established conditions that would produce a specific kind of world, a world that generates something the Greater Will wants. Perhaps order, perhaps belief, perhaps something less legible. The lives of everyone in the lands between, the demigods, the Tarnished, the ordinary people, exist within this operation without necessarily mattering to it individually. This reading is supported by the existence of other outer gods in the lore, the formless mother who empowered Mog, the Scarlet Rot, which some descriptions treat as a god in itself rather than simply a disease. The moon, which Ranni draws on, the frenzied flame, which represents a will toward undifferentiation, toward the erasure of all distinction. Each of these outer gods has a different agenda, a different preferred shape for the world, and the lands between is, from a certain angle, a contest between these agendas, playing out through the people who become their instruments. The Two Fingers and the Greater Will won that contest for a very long time. The Golden Order was their victory condition maintained. What the Shattering represents, in this reading, is the moment when the winning side fractured from within. There is something in the Two Fingers' design that is worth sitting with. They are parts of a body, severed, gesturing in the absence of the whole. The Three Fingers, their counterpart associated with the frenzied flame, are similarly disembodied, similarly incomplete. The lore suggests that these are the remnants of something larger, something that was broken or divided long before the events of the game. What the whole body was, what it wanted, what happened to it, is not explained. It is one of several threads the game leaves hanging, not as an oversight, but as a deliberate horizon. The world is bigger than what you can see of it. The Erdtree and the Golden Order. The Erdtree is visible from almost everywhere in the lands between. It is enormous, golden, lit from within, impossible to ignore. It is the visual centre of the world, the thing every road seems to point toward, the landmark that orients everything else spatially. It is also, in the lore, the mechanism by which the Greater Will maintains its influence over the physical world. The Erdtree is not simply a tree in a symbolic sense. It is literally connected to the cycle of life and death in the lands between. When people die, their spirits return to the Erdtree. When they are reborn, they emerge from it. The Erdtree processes the dead and returns them. This is what the removal of death accomplished practically. Without the rune of death sealing off true ending, everything that died came back through the Erdtree. Nothing could leave the cycle. The roots of the Erdtree run under everything. They reach into the deep-root depths, where Godwyn's corrupted body has also spread. There is a community of people in the deep-root depths, followers of Godwyn, in a strange indirect way, who have accepted the idea that the Erdtree's roots are a kind of grey sand, that resting among them is its own form of peace. This community is peaceful and a little eerie, and they are not wrong exactly. The roots are real. The connection to the Erdtree's power is real, but the peace they have found is also the peace of having opted out of everything above. The Golden Order as a governing philosophy is built on the Erdtree's authority. It holds that the Erdtree's light is the source of all legitimate power, that the demigods who carry runes from the Elden Ring are its rightful nobility, and that the laws encoded in the Elden Ring are the correct laws for the world. It is a complete system. It accounts for birth, death, hierarchy, meaning, and purpose. It asks in return that you accept its terms without negotiation. What the lore accumulates, across hundreds of item descriptions and NPC conversations, is a picture of who those terms worked for and who they did not. The omens, born with deformities the Order called cursed, were imprisoned or worse. The dragons, who had their own civilization before the Erdtree's dominance, were pushed to the margins. The Albinaurics, artificial people created through a specific kind of sorcery, were denied status within the Order's framework. The Crucible, the primordial state of life before the Erdtree organised it, was suppressed and branded as something shameful. The Order was not simply cruel, it provided genuine things. Stability, the near abolition of death, a framework that allowed a civilization to exist and grow over centuries. These are not nothing. But the cost was borne unevenly, and the lore does not let you forget that. Godfrey's conquests to establish the Order's reach involved actual wars, actual destruction of existing cultures and peoples. The Erdtree's roots reaching under everything is not just a metaphor for spiritual presence, it is a physical encroachment. The world that existed before the Golden Order is still present in ruins, in the ancient dragon civilization, in Farum Azula, in the histories that the Order either absorbed or erased. When Marika shattered the Elden Ring, one reading is that she was destroying the Order out of grief or madness. Another reading is that she had simply looked at what the Order was costing, over centuries of maintaining it, and found she could not justify it any longer. The lore does not confirm either reading. It gives you both and leaves you in the middle. The Crucible. Before the Golden Order organised life in the lands between into its current forms, there was something called the Crucible. Item descriptions associated with early dragon cult equipment and certain ancient armour sets describe the Crucible as the primordial state of life, the undifferentiated vitality, from which all the organised forms of life emerged. In practical terms, the Crucible manifests as an ancient form of incantation magic that produces animalistic traits in the caster. Tails, wings, horns, aspects of dragon, or lion, or the deep sea. These incantations are considered heretical by the Golden Order because they point back to a time before the Order existed, a time when life was more fluid and less organised around the Erdtree's hierarchy. The Crucible Knights, who appear throughout the game as powerful and ancient enemies, are remnants of Godfrey's original army. They fought for Godfrey before the Golden Order fully crystallised, when the connection to the Crucible was not yet considered shameful. They are extremely old. Their armour is described as bearing the marks of the Crucible in its own metal. When you fight them, you fight something from before the world became what it currently is. This detail matters because it complicates the Golden Order's origin story. Godfrey himself, the first Elden Lord, the man who built the Order through conquest, began his campaigns with warriors who drew on the Crucible. The Order that would later condemn the Crucible as primitive or dangerous was built by people who used it. The suppression of the Crucible tradition was not a rejection of something alien. It was the Order rejecting part of its own foundation. There is a broader pattern in the lore, where the Golden Order erases or suppresses what it was built on, and then presents itself as if it had always existed in its current form. The dragons were subdued, but the dragon communion traditions persist in secret. The Crucible was condemned, but its practitioners still exist in hidden places. The ancient histories of civilizations before the Erdtree are buried, but the physical remains are still there if you go looking. The world of Elden Ring is layered in this way. Every stratum of the environment, from the surface civilization of Lendel down through the underground Siofra River, and further into the deep-root depths, and further still into the ancient underground lake, represents an older layer of a world that the Golden Order built on top of, rather than replacing. The surface is the Order's story. Everything underneath is everything else. Siofra River and the underground civilizations. Below the lands between, accessible through wells hidden in various locations, is the underground world. It is vast. It has its own sky, or something that functions like a sky, illuminated by countless floating lights that resemble stars. It has ruins of civilizations that predate what exists above. It feels ancient in a way that the surface world, for all its decay, does not quite match. The Siofra River is the first major underground area most players discover. It is lush and strange, with enormous stone structures and ruins of a people who lived here long before the game's current era. The ancestral followers who inhabit this area are not hostile by default. They are engaged in rituals around fires, performing ceremonies connected to the spirits of animals and the dead. Their presence suggests that the underground was not simply a void before the Erdtree. People lived here. They had their own relationships with death and life and continuity. The underground in Elden Ring functions as a kind of archive of what was replaced. Everything the Golden Order built on top of, everything it suppressed or erased from the surface world, has an analogue or a remnant somewhere below. The Eternal Cities, Nokron and Nokstella, were ancient civilizations that the lore suggests were punished by the gods, struck down from above. Their ruins are now deep underground, and the people who remain there, the silver tears, the Asimi creatures, the star-shaped beings, are changed in ways that point toward whatever was done to them. Nokron in particular is connected to Ranni's questline. It is where you find the Fingerslayer blade, a weapon capable of harming the two fingers, which Ranni needs for her plan. The Eternal Cities were civilizations that apparently sought to understand the two fingers and the Greater Will's nature, and they paid for that curiosity. One possible reading of their destruction is that they got close enough to something the Greater Will did not want examined. The underground is not simply decorative in the lore, it is the memory of the world that the surface version has tried to forget. Every trip below ground in Elden Ring is, in some sense, an archaeological dig into a history the dominant culture prefers to leave buried. The Frenzied Flame. The Frenzied Flame is an outer god whose nature is directly opposed to everything the Golden Order represents. Where the Golden Order seeks to organize, to differentiate, to assign each thing its place and function, the Frenzied Flame seeks to undo all of that. To merge everything back into an undifferentiated unity, to end the distinction between one person and another, between one thing and another, to collapse all of creation back into a single formless state. This sounds like destruction. And it is, but the lore allows a slightly more nuanced reading. The world as organized by the Greater Will has caused enormous suffering. The distinctions it enforces between those with grace and those without, between demigods and common people, between the living and the dead trapped in its cycle, have been the source of that suffering. The Frenzied Flame does not distinguish. It cannot. Everything is equally subject to its dissolution. There is, in a terrible way, a kind of equality in that the three fingers, the counterpart to the two fingers, reside in the deepest accessible point below Lendel. Reaching them requires stripping yourself of everything, descending through the subterranean shunning grounds, through the place where Mog and Morgott were born, deeper and further down than anything else in the city. When you reach the three fingers, they embrace your character and pass the flame of frenzy into your body. Your eyes change. You become the Lord of Chaos, the vessel for an ending that would unmake everything. The questline associated with Shabriri and Hyetta leads players toward this ending through a sequence that is notably uncomfortable. Hyetta is a blind woman searching for guidance, for purpose, for something to believe in. She is led, step by step, through a questline that gives her what she is searching for, which is connection to the Frenzied Flame. The questline does not hide what it is doing. The tragedy is that her desire for meaning is genuine, and the thing filling it is genuinely terrible. Malenia, if she is still alive at this point in the game, confronts the player who chooses the Frenzied Flame ending. She promises to kill you, to stop the ending from completing. She is not angry in the way of a betrayed companion. She is simply clear. This cannot be allowed. What you have chosen will end everything. She will do what she has to. Whether the Frenzied Flame ending is a horror or a mercy is something the lore does not settle. It presents both possibilities with equal seriousness, which is again characteristic of how Elden Ring handles its moral landscape. It does not tell you what to think. It shows you the full shape of each option and leaves the conclusion to you. Malenia. Malenia appears at the start of the game as your first and most consistent companion. She offers you the ability to level up your character in exchange for accompanying you on your journey. She has a goal of her own, to reach the Erdtree, to be allowed inside, to use herself as kindling to open the path that the Erdtree has sealed. She does not explain her full origin. She says she was born from a promise Marika made, and that she has been waiting for a tarnished worthy of completing this journey. The lore around her is deliberately sparse, in a way that feels intentional rather than incomplete. She refers to herself as maidenless in a particular sense, without a mother, without a clear lineage, existing outside the normal structures. One possible reading, supported by certain item descriptions and the physical resemblance, is that Malenia is a fragment of Marika herself, a splinter of consciousness that Marika sent out at some point, whether before or after the Shattering. This would explain why her task is connected so specifically to the Erdtree, why her self-sacrifice opens the path, and why she seems to know things about Marika's situation that an ordinary observer would not. She has her eye closed throughout the game, covering it when she appears to you. One of the endings reveals that opening her eye shows a flame within it. The specific nature of that flame and what it connects to is not fully explained. It is another detail the game places and leaves for you to sit with. What is clear is that Malenia is genuinely attached to you, the tarnish she has chosen. Her dialogue over the course of the game develops from formal and instructional to something warmer and more personal. She asks about your intentions. She expresses something close to concern. Whether this is the attachment of a companion who has spent long enough with you to develop genuine feeling, or whether it is something built into her purpose, is left open. When she burns herself at the Erdtree and you walk into the fire, there is nothing ceremonial about the game's presentation of it. It is quiet. She does what she said she would do, and the game moves on without giving you a moment to process it, which is itself a kind of statement about what it costs to keep moving forward in this world. Fia, the deathbed companion. Fia is one of the NPCs you find at the Roundtable Hold, the hub location where various characters gather over the course of the game. She offers embraces. She will hold your character if you ask her to. She is warm and specific about this, explaining that it is her nature, her purpose, to provide comfort to the dying and the dead. She is also, slowly and deliberately, working toward a goal that the other characters at the Roundtable Hold would strongly object to if they knew about it. Fia is a deathbed companion, part of a tradition connected to Godwyn's death and the Night of the Black Knives. Her goal is to give proper death back to Godwyn. She carries within her body the mending rune of the Death Prince, a rune that she has been accumulating through her embraces, through the closeness she shares with those who are dying. She intends to mend the Elden Ring with this rune, which would restore the concept of true death to the world's laws. This is not simply a mechanical goal. In the lore, the absence of true death has caused enormous suffering. The dead that cannot fully die accumulate in the deep-root depths at the Erdtree's roots, waiting in a kind of limbo that is neither living nor properly dead. Godwyn himself is the most extreme example. He is alive without a soul, endlessly growing, a body without consciousness, enormous and terrible and unable to end. Fia believes that restoring death is a mercy, that the world needs an exit, that the cycle the Erdtree imposes, consuming the dead and returning them, is a form of imprisonment, however golden it looks from the outside. Her questline requires you to reach the deep-root depths and find her there, deep in the roots. She has gathered the champions she has embraced throughout the game, the people she held at the Round Table, and they have followed her into the depths to serve her final purpose. The boss of her questline is a version of these champions fused together, which is dark in its own way, but the lore presents it as something they chose, rather than something done to them. Fia herself is not a villain. Her warmth appears to be genuine. Her goal, restoring death to the world, is presented as genuinely arguable. Whether her ending is good depends on your view of what the world needs more, the continued suppression of death in service of the Erdtree's cycle, or the return of finality at the cost of everything that cycle protected. Her ending is one of the quieter ones. She simply achieves her goal, and the world changes in a way that most people in it might not immediately perceive. The great change is subtle. Death is back. Everything it implies will follow. over time. D. Hunter of the Dead. D is one of the stranger characters at the Round Table Hold. He is a hunter who kills the undead and the walking dead with no ambiguity about whether they deserve it. He is matter-of-fact about this. He does not enjoy it. He simply considers it correct. His twin brother Darian, also called D, is connected to Fia's questline in a way that complicates the surface reading of both of them. The lore around the two brothers suggests that the distinction between a compassionate approach to the dead, Fia's approach, and a destructive one, D's approach, is not as clean, as either of them would represent it. D kills the dead because he believes it is mercy. Fia embraces the dead because she believes it is mercy. They are not as opposed as they seem. D's appearance in the questline's resolution is one of the more unexpected moments in the game. What happens between the two brothers and Fia is brief and strange, and the lore does not editorialize about it. It happens, and the questline moves on. What D represents within the broader lore is a certain kind of rigidity. He has made a determination about what the dead are and what should be done about them, and he has organized his entire life around that determination. The game presents his certainty as both admirable in its commitment and limiting in its blindness. He cannot see Fia clearly because he has already decided what she is. Rogier and the Knight of the Black Knives. Rogier is a sorcerer at the Round Table Hold who has become obsessed with the Knight of the Black Knives and its connection to what happened to Godwyn. He found the site of Godwyn's death, deep beneath Stormvale Castle, and touching the black rot that marks that site infected him. He is dying slowly of it. He wants to know the truth before he goes. His questline intersects with Ranni's and with the broader mystery around the Knight of the Black Knives in a way that provides some of the clearest exposition the game offers on those events. Through Rogier and Ranni's dialogue, you can piece together the sequence of events, the daggers, the souls, the decision Ranni made to use the Knight of the Black Knives as cover for her own escape from her fate. Rogier is one of the game's more humane figures. He is curious and specific and dying, and he wants to understand something true before he stops being able to want anything. He is not pursuing power. He is not trying to become a lord. He is a researcher who got too close to his subject and is now paying for it, and he faces this with something that is not quite acceptance, but is close to it. He sends a letter to the player if they advance both his questline and Ranni's to a certain point. The letter is brief and direct and amounts to a goodbye. It is one of the more genuinely affecting pieces of writing in the game, precisely because it does not try to be affecting. He simply says what he needs to say and ends. Blade. We touched on Blade when discussing Ranni, but he deserves more time. He is one of the most developed characters in the game, and his arc is one of the most painful. He is a half-wolf warrior, enormous and striking, one of the shadow constructs created by the Two Fingers to serve an Empyrean. He was made to serve Ranni. He was also made with a failsafe. When Ranni's actions became too transgressive for the Two Fingers to permit, Blade was designed to become her enemy, to turn on her and destroy her. Blade knows this. He is aware of what he was built to be. He fights it throughout his questline, insisting on his loyalty to Ranni, insisting that his love for her is his own, even if his body was designed to eventually betray her. This is one of the more philosophically pointed character details in the game. Can a feeling be genuinely yours if the capacity for it was engineered into you, and can a betrayal be genuinely yours if it was engineered into you in the same way? Blade chooses loyalty for as long as he can. He helps you. He fights beside you in one encounter. He is, by any practical measure, a good ally and a devoted friend. And then the failsafe activates. He is found at the end of Ranni's questline, standing outside her tower, his mind gone, attacking everything. Ranni has already achieved her goal and ascended. She does not need him anymore. He has been consumed by what he was made to become, and there is nothing of him left to save. You have to kill him. There is no other option. The game does not give you a way to restore him or redirect him. He is simply there, lost, and you end it. The item description for the armor you receive from him afterward says that he was a loyal friend to the last. That is the game's final word on what he was. Not what he was made to be, what he was. Alexander the Iron Fist. Alexander is a large iron pot with arms and legs and a face and an extremely enthusiastic personality. He is one of the more overtly comic characters in the game, cheerful and determined and slightly absurd in appearance. He is also one of the characters whose arc, if you follow it to its conclusion, ends with something much heavier than his introduction suggests. He is a warrior jar. He wants to be a great warrior. He has been training himself, filling himself with the remains of fallen warriors in the tradition of his kind, absorbing their strength into his body. He travels to fights and festivals and arenas in pursuit of this goal with a sincerity that is impossible not to find endearing. His questline takes him eventually to Farum Azula, the crumbling ancient dragon realm, where he has gone to test himself against the most powerful opponents he can find. You encounter him there, and he asks you to fight him. He wants, as his final act, to be defeated by a worthy opponent so that you can absorb what he has accumulated and carry it forward. It is framed as an honor. He is giving you his best self. He is not despairing about it. He is proud. After you defeat him, the item you receive, Alexander's Innards, contains everything he collected. His life's work passed to you. The game does not underscore this. It just hands you the item and lets you continue. The weight of it is entirely in the contrast between how he presented himself, cheerful and large and a little silly, and what he ultimately offered. Nephili Lu. Nephili is a warrior you can find early in the game, near Stormvale Castle. She is fierce and direct, and she is on a mission to kill Godrick. She helps you with that. She then disappears back to the Round Table Hold, where she sits in a state of increasing despair as her questline develops. She is the adopted daughter of Gideon Ofnir, one of the other Round Table Hold characters, and her questline is substantially about what happens when a person built around a singular purpose, which was killing Godrick, has to figure out what comes after. She is adrift. She drinks. She sits on the floor. She is not performing this despair. It is simply where she is. Her questline has a resolution that involves the underground civilization of Stormvale, a specific item, and eventually the possibility of her claiming a kind of lordship over the people who have been left without governance. Whether this resolution is satisfying depends on whether you believe she has found a genuine purpose or simply a new task to fill the space where the old one was. She carries a specific weapon, Stormhawk axes, associated with her fighting style, and she is one of the few characters in the game who fights with an energy that reads as joy, rather than desperation or duty. She likes fighting. That is not nothing in a world where most people fight because they have no choice. Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing. Gideon runs the Round Table Hold in a practical sense. He is the one who welcomes New Tarnished, who organises information, who maintains the space as a functional hub. He is intelligent, collected, and quietly condescending in a way that becomes clearer the further you advance. He is gathering intelligence on all the demigods. He knows enormous amounts about the lands between, its history, its factions, its secrets. He is, as his title suggests, the all-knowing. The lore suggests that his true goal is not to restore the Elden Ring, but to understand everything first, to achieve a kind of complete knowledge that would give him power, regardless of how the larger conflict resolves. His questline's resolution reveals that he has decided the goal of becoming Elden Lord is simply not achievable, and that attempting it would be futile. He has reached this conclusion through his research, and he intends to stop you from proceeding, not out of malice, but out of a kind of intellectual certainty that he is right and you are wrong. He becomes an obstacle. You fight him in the path to the Erdtree. He is clearly prepared extensively for this fight, and he loses anyway, which is its own comment on the limits of knowledge as a substitute for action. What makes Gideon interesting is that his failure mode is common. He gathered information instead of acting on it. He convinced himself that knowing more would eventually produce certainty, and certainty would produce the correct action, and eventually he had gathered enough information to know that action was impossible. This loop, researcher's avoidance, is recognizable beyond the fantasy context. Hugh the blacksmith. Hugh is the blacksmith at the Round Table Hold, chained to his anvil. He cannot leave. He does not know why he was imprisoned. He works because it is what he has, and he is good at it. His questline, if it can be called that, involves the slow revelation that he was imprisoned specifically to serve a maiden, and that if a maiden ever brought her champion to him, he would know his purpose was fulfilled. He meets Malenia. He understands in that meeting what he was waiting for. He asks to be remembered. That is all. He has been chained to an anvil for so long that what he wants, at the end, is simply for the fact of his existence to persist in someone else's knowledge. It is a small and completely human thing to want. The game gives it to him without comment. Roderica, Spirit Tuner. Roderica arrives at the Round Table Hold in a state of complete hopelessness. She is a noblewoman who came to the Lands Between with companions who were all grafted by Godrick, incorporated into his monstrous collection. She alone escaped. She is not grateful for this. She feels she should have gone with them. She does not know what she is for, if not to be alongside her companions. She has a talent, spirit tuning, that she does not initially recognize as such. It manifests as an unusual connection to the spirits of the dead, a capacity to hear them that most people lack. The process of her questline is the process of her recognizing that this capacity is real and useful and hers. She becomes the spirit-tuning merchant, the person who upgrades the ashes you collect throughout the game, who lets you strengthen the spirits of the dead who fight alongside you. She is very good at it. She is also still underneath the professional competence, somewhat at sea, still processing the loss of her companions, still figuring out what it means to survive something you did not choose to survive. She is one of the game's gentler characters, not soft exactly, but without the ambition or the hardness that most of the characters around her carry. She is simply trying to figure out how to be useful with what she has. The Black Knife Assassins. The Black Knife Assassins are an order of assassins, all women, who carried out the Night of the Black Knives. They used blades imbued with a fragment of the Rune of Death, and they killed Godwyn. Several of them appear as enemies throughout the game, still active, still carrying their weapons. The lore around them raises questions about their relationship to Ranni's plan. One reading suggests they acted at Ranni's direction. Another suggests they acted independently, with knowledge Ranni also had. The item descriptions for their equipment describe them as faithful to a god other than the Erdtree, a lunar deity, which connects them to the tradition that runs through Ranelagh. And Ranni. One Black Knife assassin, Alecto, appears as an optional boss and drops a blade whose description provides some of the clearest language in the game about what they were doing. And why? The language is specific about the daggers carrying true death, and about the Rune of Death being taken from Marika's body while she slept. This implies an intimacy of access that narrows down who could have arranged it significantly. The broader implication of the Black Knife Assassins is that the Night of the Black Knives was not a simple assassination. It was a carefully coordinated operation that required divine-level access, intimate knowledge of Marika's situation, and a willingness to change the world's fundamental rules. About death. Whatever their exact relationship to Ranni's plan, they were instruments of a larger transformation. What happened that night is still reverberating through every part of the game's lore. Sorcery and the Academy of Raya Lucaria. The Academy of Raya Lucaria is built on a lake in Liurnia, protected by a barrier that makes direct approach from the land impossible. It is the premier institution of glintstone sorcery in the lands between, a tradition that draws on the properties of stars and their crystallized essence, rather than on the Erdtree's grace. The sorcerers of the Academy are not, in most cases, at war with the Golden Order. They occupy an uneasy position, dependent enough on the Order's stability to avoid direct conflict, but drawing on a tradition that the Order's stricter adherents consider suspect. The glintstone magic of the Academy operates through a different principle than the incantations of the Golden Order's faith. Where incantations channel the Erdtree's power, or the power of the outer gods who compete with the greater will, sorcery draws on the ancient energies of stars and their material. Residue. The students you fight in the Academy are not enemies in the sense of having chosen to fight you. Most of them are in a kind of magical trance, or have been overwhelmed by the chaotic state the Academy has fallen into since Renala's decline. The Academy in the game's present is a school in disarray, its greatest teacher incapacitated, its hierarchy fragmented, its purpose unclear now that the world has shattered. There are sorcerers in the game who represent the tradition at its best. Selen, the merchant sorcerer you can find early in Limgrave, is one of them. She is a researcher of extraordinary ability who was expelled from the Academy for pursuing a direction of research they considered dangerous, an attempt to understand the nature of a specific primeval sorcerer, a kind of source of the glintstone tradition. Her questline is about her attempt to reclaim her place in the tradition she was expelled from, and its resolution is both what she wanted and something slightly terrible, which is a pattern the game returns to repeatedly. The broader point about the Academy within the lore is that it represents what happens to traditions of knowledge within a system that tolerates them but does not fully embrace them. It exists because it is useful, and because its power is real, and because the Order is pragmatic enough to prefer a working relationship to a conflict. But it is always one political shift away from being condemned, and the people within it navigate that vulnerability in different ways. The Dragon Communion. The dragons of the lands between have their own tradition, their own relationship with power, and their own complicated history with the Golden Order. Dragon Communion is a ritual of eating the hearts of slain dragons to absorb their power. It is practiced at the Cathedral of Dragon Communion and at Farum Azula, where the ancient dragon civilization still persists in ruins. The elder dragon Graol, an enormous ancient dragon found in Caelid, is one of the oldest living creatures in the game. She cannot fight. She is simply vast and old, surrounded by her children who attack anything that threatens her. Killing her, which requires killing her children first, or simply attacking her directly, nets the player an enormous quantity of runes. She does not resist. She simply lies there. The game presents this without comment, which is itself a kind of comment. The relationship between dragons and humans in the lore involves both conflict and the possibility of something else. Godwyn's friendship with Fortisax was genuine and is described in terms that suggest a real bond between two beings who were supposed to be enemies. Fortisax is encountered in the deep-root depths, still refusing to leave Godwyn's side even after Godwyn's consciousness is gone, trying to fight the death that has settled into Godwyn's body, a battle he has been losing for a very long time. The Dragon Communion incantations you can acquire by spending dragon hearts are interesting precisely because they do not frame the consumption of a dragon's heart as simply theft. There is something in the lore around them that suggests the dragons who allow their hearts to be consumed may be doing so willingly in some cases, passing their power on. continuing in a different form. Whether this reading is too generous is something the game leaves open. The broader point about the dragons within the lore is that they represent a civilization that predates the Golden Order, and that was neither fully absorbed by it, nor fully destroyed by it. They persist. They have their own traditions and their own continuity. The Lands Between is, in this way, a palimpsest of civilizations, each one written over the one that came before, but never quite fully erasing it. Starscourge and the stars. We talked about Radahn holding the stars in place, but the concept of stars within the Elden Ring lore is worth exploring more fully. Stars are not simply astronomical objects in this world. They carry significance, agency, and consequence in a way that connects them to the outer gods and to the fundamental laws of the world. The meteor that strikes the Lands Between when Radahn is defeated, the meteor that opens the path to Nokron, is not simply a piece of falling rock. It is a consequence, a thing that was being held in place being released. The underground civilization of Nokron was waiting for something to crack the surface above it, and the falling star did exactly that. The sequence of events that follows, the access to Nokron, the items found there, the progress of Ranni's plan, all of it flows from the release of that particular star. Glintstone itself, the material that sorcery draws on and that the Academy studies, is described in item descriptions as crystallized starlight, the solidified residue of ancient stellar power. The connection between stars and sorcery is not simply aesthetic, it is material. The stars are a source of power that is distinct from the Erdtree's power, older in some respects, drawing on different cosmic principles. The Carian royal family, Renala's family, is specifically associated with the stars and the moon. Their castle is built on a lake that reflects the sky, and the illusion of a night sky hangs over their territory perpetually. Their sorcery draws on this tradition, moon and stars, rather than Erdtree light. The conflict between the Carian tradition and the Golden Order, though it never fully erupted into open war during Renala's time, is a conflict between two different sources of power and two different understandings of what the world is made of. Farum Azula. We have returned to Farum Azula several times in this discussion, and it deserves its own consideration. It is physically one of the strangest environments in the game, ancient ruins suspended in a perpetual storm above the world, connected to nothing, floating in a space that is not quite inside the Lands Between, and not quite outside it. The dragon civilization that built Farum Azula was sophisticated. The scale of the ruins suggests buildings of enormous height and complexity. The dragons that still inhabit it are not simply animals. They are the remnants of a civilization, degraded by time into something more purely predatory, but the structures around them show what they were capable of. The beastmen of Farum Azula are another remnant humanoid creatures in ancient armour who still guard the ruins. They are connected to Malekith, who is also there, which creates an odd geography. Why is Marika's shadow, the keeper of the Rune of Death, stationed in the ruins of a pre-Erdtree dragon civilization? The lore does not answer this directly. One possible reading is that Farum Azula, existing outside the normal flow of time and outside the Lands Between's geography, is simply the safest place to keep something as dangerous as the Rune of Death. Another reading is that there is a connection between the dragon civilization's end and the Rune of Death's containment that the lore has not fully surfaced. The boss sequence in Farum Azula, which includes the Godskin duo Malekith and proximity to Placidusax, feels like a condensed history of the world. You move through layers of what came before: dragon civilization, the constructs of the current gods, the Keeper of Death itself, all compressed into a single location that sits outside time. When Farum Azula begins to break apart during your visit, pieces of it falling away into the storm below, there is a sense that simply being there is accelerating something, that the ruins were holding together just long enough for this final chapter, and now they are finally releasing. The world below the storm, when you catch glimpses of it, looks like the lands between far below. The distance between the ruins and the world you came from is vertiginous in a way that feels intentional. The Godskin, Apostles and Nobles. The Godskin are a faction of enemies that appear throughout the game in various locations, wearing robes made from the skin of gods. They are ancient. They predate the current era. They are connected to a tradition that existed before the Shattering. The item descriptions for their equipment suggest that they were originally tasked with killing the early gods, entities that existed before or alongside the Erdtree's dominance, and that they wore the skin of those gods as proof of their work and as a source of power. This practice did not end when the gods they were originally hunting were gone. The Godskin continued, finding new targets, collecting more material. They are one of the more disturbing enemy types in the game, not because of their combat style, though their physics-defying stretching and contortion is deeply unsettling, but because of the implied history in their appearance. They have been doing this for a very long time. The tradition of wearing divine skin is old enough to predate the Golden Order, and they are still going. Their presence at Farum Azula, at the Divine Tower of Caelid, at various sacred sites throughout the lands between, suggests that they have access to locations that other enemies do not, that they move within a map of power that corresponds to the old divine geography, rather than the current one. The Volcano Manor's collection of assassination targets includes people described as being in league with the Godskin. This positions Rykard's project, the project of killing demigods and defying divine authority, as potentially connected to the Godskin's older tradition of the same. Whether this connection is intentional or simply parallel is not clear from the lore. The Round Table Hold. The Round Table Hold exists outside the lands between in a physical sense. It is accessible only through teleportation. It appears to be a building with corridors and rooms and a central hall with a large round table, but its location in any mappable geography is undefined. It is a space maintained specifically for Tarnished, a neutral ground where different people pursuing the same basic goal can gather without immediately trying to kill each other. The table in the centre is the detail that accumulates meaning slowly. It is a round table. No seat at a round table is at the head. The symbolism is old and not accidental. The Round Table Hold is structured, at least architecturally, around the premise that the Tarnished who gather there are equals. Whether any of them actually treat each other that way is another matter entirely. The various characters who inhabit the Hold across the game have their own agendas. Gideon's information gathering, Rogier's research, Nephili's grief, Hugh's imprisonment, Dee's hunting, Fear's slowly revealed purpose. The Hold presents the appearance of a community of equals working toward a shared goal. What it actually is a collection of individuals who happen to share a location, each pursuing something specific, occasionally overlapping, occasionally in direct conflict. The Hold is one of the places in the game where the contrast between what a structure symbolizes and what it actually is becomes most legible. The Golden Order itself makes this contrast repeatedly. The Erdtree's warmth against the cold mechanics of what it actually does to the world. The divine hierarchies claim to represent order and flourishing against the accumulated evidence of what that hierarchy costs. The Round Table Hold is a smaller version of the same pattern, a place that looks like fellowship, and is, in practice, a waiting room for people who may not survive what comes next. Lendel, Royal Capital. Lendel is the capital of the lands between, built around the base of the Erdtree, or more specifically, built around the enormous fossilized wing of a dragon that became part of the city's architecture after a battle in the ancient past. The city is grand, layered, full of golden light and enormous statues, and the sense of a civilization at the height of its ambition. It is also, in the game's present, mostly empty. The Shattering sent the Golden Order into decline. The city is guarded by Erdtree soldiers, and by Morgoth in his capacity as the secret king, but the population that would have filled this city in the height of the Order's power is largely absent. There are wandering soldiers and minor enemies and the occasional NPC, but the city, as a living civic place, is already in the past. Moving through Lundel is moving through the bones of a civilization. The grandeur is still present, the architecture still intact, the golden light still falling from the Erd Tree. But the absence of the people it was built for is everywhere. This is what the Golden Order has been reduced to, a beautiful, empty structure that still functions on a mechanical level but has lost the human texture that made it something more than mechanisms. The underground portion of Lendel, the subterranean shunning grounds, is the direct inversion of the capital above. Where the upper city is golden and grand and emptied, the underground is dark and wet and full of the people the city above rejected. Omens, the walking dead, creatures that the Order would not have above ground. The capital sits on top of its own refuse, in the most literal sense. After a certain point in the game, Lendel changes. The Erdtree's exterior becomes covered in ash. The capital is now Lendel, Ashen Capital, and the change in visual tone is total. The Golden City is grey. Everything is covered in the soft, silent accumulation of burned material. The transformation happened because of something you did earlier in the game, and the city has no response to it. It is simply changed. The grandeur does not go away exactly. It becomes a grandeur under ash, which might be more honest than it was before. The divine towers. Scattered throughout the lands between are tall towers, each one connected to a specific great rune and to the demigod who carries it. The divine towers allow Tarnished to restore great runes to their power after taking them from demigods. They are remnants of the Elden Ring structure, the infrastructure of the old order still functioning even now. Each tower has a specific location and approach that reflects something about the rune it restores. The Divine Tower of Caelid is surrounded by rot and difficulty that mirrors Radahn's corrupted state. The Divine Tower of East Altus is connected to Morgoth, and the path to it goes through the underground and past things the city above pretends are not there. The tower connected to Malenia is in the Haligtree, the tree that Miquella built outside the Erdtree system, which means her rune is the farthest from the Golden Orders. Infrastructure. The towers are among the oldest structures in the game. They predate the current era and possibly the Golden Order itself. They were built to anchor the distribution of the Elden Ring's power, to provide the nodes through which divine authority flowed from the Elden Ring to the world. When the Elden Ring shattered, the towers did not fall. They kept functioning, waiting, available to anyone who could reach them. This is worth noting because it means the infrastructure of the old order is still intact and still usable even after the order it served has collapsed. The physical structures of power outlast the political structures. The divine towers do not care who uses them. They will restore any great rune brought to them. The demigod wars and the Shattering have not changed that. The towers keep going, patient and ancient, waiting for someone to come with the right key. Malenia's Haligtree and Elthal. The Haligtree is the tree Miquella grew. It is enormous, ancient in the way things in Elden Ring become ancient quickly when touched by divine power, and it sits in the far northwest of the map, accessible only through a hidden path, guarded by one of the most demanding navigation puzzles in the game. The community that gathered around the Haligtree was built around Miquella's promise of a different kind of order. People who had been rejected by the Erdtree, Albinaurics, Omens, others outside the Golden Order's scope of care, came to the Haligtree because Miquella offered something the Erdtree would not. Acceptance without condition. Healing without hierarchy. Miquella's disappearance broke this project. The Haligtree stopped growing. The community that had gathered under it was left without its founder and without the completion of what he promised. and then the scarlet rot began to spread. Elfell, the city built within the Halictree's branches, is now heavily infected with the rot. The people who came seeking healing are themselves dying of the same disease that Malenia carries. The irony is precise and brutal. Miquella's attempt to build a place of healing has become a place of a particular kind of suffering, because the person who is supposed to protect it, Malenia, is herself the source of the infection. Malenia is at the base of Elfell, in a flowering of the scarlet rot, dormant and waiting. She has been there since the Battle of Aeonia, recovering, defended by the remnants of her clean-rot knights, some of whom are themselves beginning to be consumed by the rot they were meant to guard against. The knights who still function are among the more formidable enemies in the game. They are not fighting for a system or a hierarchy. They are fighting for her, specifically, because she is what they pledged to, and they have not broken that pledge, regardless of what it costs them. The visual design of the Halictree section, golden and rotting simultaneously, the branches both beautiful and diseased, is one of the game's more explicit images of what happens when a good intention meets an incurable condition. Miquella's love for Malenia, his decision to build her a sanctuary, became the site of her most devastating expression of the thing she cannot control. Millicent. Millicent is one of the most developed questline characters in the game. She first appears in Caelid, infected with a lighter form of the scarlet rot than Malenia carries, and her questline is substantially about her relationship to that inheritance. She does not know at first that she is connected to Malenia. She knows she has the rot. She knows it is killing her. She finds a way to manage it through a prosthetic arm that is itself significant in the lore, a golden needle implanted by Gowry, an NPC sorcerer with his own complicated agenda. As her questline develops, she learns what she is. She is, one possible reading suggests, a daughter of Malenia, produced through the rot's propagation rather than through conventional means. She is a piece of Malenia's disease made into a person. This revelation does not break her. She processes it, continues, and eventually faces a choice about what to do with what she is. The two endings of her questline are both painful in different ways. One results in her achieving a kind of peace, completing her journey, and dying in a state of resolution. The other results in her being consumed. The difference between them comes down to a choice the player makes, which is itself a statement about what kind of story you want to be part of. What makes Millicent resonate within the broader lore is the specificity of her situation. She is defined by something she did not choose, something she was born into or made from, and the questline is about whether that origin determines her entirely, or whether she can be something else within it. This is a question that runs through most of the Demigod stories, through Morgott and Mog and Malenia herself. Millicent's questline compresses it into a smaller, more intimate scale. Gurranq, Beast Clergyman. Gurranq is the Beast Clergyman, the disguised form of Malekith. Before the revelation of who he actually is, he appears as a large, hunched creature in the bestial sanctum in the Dragonbarrow, northeast of Caelid. He trades in Deathroot, pieces of the death that has escaped into the world following the Night of the Black Knives, in exchange for bestial incantations. He is eating the Deathroot. This is his function. The death that has leaked into the world, that the Night of the Black Knives released, is manifesting as Deathroot and spreading through the earth. Gurranq consumes it, containing it, pulling it back out of the world's body. He becomes increasingly unstable as you bring him more. He attacks you at certain points. The implication is that consuming death has a cost, that Malekith, the guardian of the Rune of Death, the entity whose entire existence is organised around containing death, is himself being consumed by what he contains. This is one of the details in the lore that points toward a reading of Malekith not as a simple enforcer, but as a figure bearing an enormous weight. He contains death. He has contained it for an immeasurable time. The death that leaked out after the Night of the Black Knives is a violation of what he is supposed to be holding, and he is trying to recollect it piece by piece while it slowly affects him. When he transforms into Malekith in the boss fight, the violence of the transformation, the explosion of scale and aggression, reads differently after spending time with Godrick. The calm, examining clergyman and the furious guardian of death are both expressions of the same essential condition. He is trying to hold something that wants to be free, and it is costing him everything to do it. The lands between after the Shattering. One detail that accumulates slowly across the game is the picture of what the lands between was like before the Shattering and what changed afterward. The Shattering was not simply a political event or a theological crisis. It was a physical transformation of the world. The runes that the demigods carried, pieces of the Elden Ring, generated effects in the territories they controlled. Radahn's gravity magic and his rune together shaped Caelid's landscape and the sky above it. Renala's lunar tradition shaped Liurnia. The rot in Caelid, which followed the Battle of Aeonia, was not simply a chemical or biological event. It was a manifestation of the outer god of rot through the crack that the battle opened. Item descriptions from the Shattering era describe a world in rapid transformation, territories that had been stable for centuries suddenly becoming hostile. The divine protections that the Golden Order had provided, the absence of death, the Erdtree's cycle of rebirth, beginning to function erratically as the Elden Ring that powered them was no longer whole. People who had relied on rebirth, finding that it no longer worked reliably, death returning in some places and not others, confusion, war, flight. The tarnished arrive in this aftermath. The game's present is a world that has been in the post-Shattering period long enough for new equilibria to have formed. Radahn has been mad in Caelid for long enough that the Radahn festival has become an established tradition. Malenia has been dormant in the Haligtree long enough that the rot has spread throughout Elfell. The various demigod factions have settled into their current states and are no longer actively waging the full-scale war of the Shattering's immediate aftermath. You arrive into a world that has processed its catastrophe and begun, in various ways, to normalize it. This is one of the more specific and uncomfortable things Elden Ring does with its timeline. The horror is not fresh. The loss is not acute. Everything terrible that happened has been lived with long enough to become the background of daily life. And into this normalized catastrophe comes a tarnished who has been called back to fix it, or break it further, or make something entirely different of it. The weight of endings. The game has 6 major endings, and each of them represents a different answer to the question of what the world should be rebuilt around. They are not presented as clearly good or clearly bad. They are presented as choices with consequences that are legible and real, but not ultimately adjudicated by the game itself. The Age of Fracture ending, which you reach by mending the Elden Ring as it was, essentially restores the Golden Order in a weakened form. It does not fix what was wrong, it resumes what was interrupted. The world continues as it was heading, with the same structural inequities and the same outer god's preferences encoded into its laws. The Age of Duskborn ending, Fear's ending, restores death to the world. The lands between gains the ability to truly end. What the Golden Order's immortality was protecting people from, they are now vulnerable to again. Whether this is liberation or loss depends on what you think immortality within the Erdtree cycle was worth. The Age of Order ending, which involves a mending rune associated with a specific item, repairs the Elden Ring toward a stricter, more fundamentalist version of the Golden Order. The Two Fingers preferred outcome. The Greater Will gets what it wants. The divergences and heresies are corrected. The Blessing of Despair ending, associated with Shabriri, raises a Lord of Chaos and unmakes the world. This is the Frenzied Flame's preferred outcome. everything dissolves. Ranni's ending replaces the Elden Ring's order entirely with her own, the Order of the Moon, cold and distant, defined by separation rather than the Erdtree's encompassing warmth. The world gains autonomy and distance from divine control. Whether that is better depends on what you think people do with freedom from divine management. The Age of the Stars ending is what Ranni's ending is sometimes called, and it is the one most players encounter in their first serious attempt at a full questline. The image of Ranni's tiny hand reaching down from the sky as she ascends into the cosmos, offering to take you with her, is one of the most discussed moments in the game. It is quiet and strange, and oddly personal for an ending that involves rewriting the laws of the world. What all the endings share is the absence of triumph. None of them feel like victory in a conventional sense. Each of them involves enormous loss and enormous change, and a future that is uncertain in specific ways. The game does not offer you a restoration of what was good, because it has spent its entire length showing you that what was good was never cleanly separated from what was terrible. The Golden Order was both. The Erdtree was both. Every demigod was both. The ending you choose is not a verdict on the world, it is a direction, and the world that follows will have to be lived in by the people who are still there, without any certainty about whether what you chose was right. The legacy of Godfrey's warriors. We have talked about Godfrey, but not about what became of the warriors he led, the original army of the Golden Order's founding campaigns. The Crucible Knights are one remnant. There are others. The Serosh spirit attached to Godfrey represents a specific chapter of this history. Godfrey killed a great lion called Serosh, or conquered it, and its spirit attached to Godfrey as a kind of living restraint. Serosh was described as having tried to temper Godfrey's killing instinct, to channel it toward kingship rather than pure warfare. That the lion's spirit sits on Godfrey's back permanently, still performing this function, suggests that Godfrey accepted the restraint willingly. He wanted to be more than a fighter. He wanted to be a king. The lion reminded him of that. The warriors who followed Godfrey into exile became the ancestors of the Tarnished, who are now being called back. Their generations of wandering, fighting, dying and returning, without the Erdtree's full support, without the Lands Between's resources, produced a specific kind of person. Harder. More resilient. Less dependent on the system that the Lands Between takes for granted. This is the law's explanation for why the Tarnished can do what the denizens of the Lands Between cannot. Not because they are special by birth, but because they were made by their conditions. The exile that was meant to be a dismissal became a preparation. The ancestral spirit. In the Siofra River, there is a boss called the ancestral spirit, a great stag of supernatural scale whose body is made of light and bone and the accumulated presence of many creatures. It is connected to the beliefs of the ancestral followers who inhabit the underground, their tradition of the dead continuing in animal spirits. The ancestral spirit and the Erdtree represent two different understandings of what happens to the dead. The Erdtree consumes and recycles. The ancestral tradition suggests that the dead persist in their own form, that the spirits of animals and people continue in a way that is not absorption but preservation. Whether this tradition is simply a belief, or whether it reflects something real about how death works in the Lands Between, separate from the Erdtree's management of it, is something the law suggests without confirming. The ancestral followers have clearly practiced their rituals long enough to produce the ancestral spirit as a real entity, which suggests at minimum that their practice has some basis in the world's actual metaphysics. The existence of the ancestral spirit below the Lands Between, in the space where older traditions persist, is consistent with the game's broader pattern of the underground, preserving what the surface has replaced. There is a way of being dead that is not the Erdtree's way. It has been down here the whole time. Lickdragon Fortisax. Fortisax is one of the most poignant figures in the game's optional content. He is the dragon who became Godwyn's friend, who refused to leave when Godwyn died, who has been in the deep-root depths trying to fight the death that settled into Godwyn's body ever since. To access Fortisax, you need to be in Fia's questline, which involves resting in her arms to enter a dream state within Godwyn's death. You fight Fortisax, not because he is your enemy, but because he is still fighting, still trying to protect his friend, and he cannot tell the difference between you and another. Threat. The fight has an elegiac quality that the game's other dragon fights do not. Fortisax is not defending territory or acting on instinct. He is grieving. He is an enormous ancient dragon performing the most human act imaginable, refusing to leave the side of someone who cannot benefit from his presence anymore, because leaving would mean accepting that the story is over. His item description says that he was a friend to Godwyn and that he resisted the death that claimed Godwyn, fighting it for an age. He is one of the most direct expressions in the game of what loyalty looks like when it has outlasted its purpose. He keeps going because stopping would mean letting go, and he has not yet found a way to do that. When you defeat him, you receive a remembrance that describes his legacy in terms of lightning and defiance. He is remembered as a fighter who would not surrender. The game does not call this foolish or wise. It simply notes that this is what he was and what he did. What remains? The lands between, after everything, is a world full of things that could not let go. Fortisax could not let go of Godwyn. Rennala could not let go of Radahn. Morgott could not let go of the order that imprisoned him. Placidusax has been waiting for a god who never returned, waiting so long that time stopped meaning what it usually means. The game is not saying that holding on is wrong. It is not saying that letting go is right. It is showing you all the different shapes that attachment takes when the things people are attached to are broken, or gone, or never quite real in the way they were believed to be. The Elden Ring itself was the thing the world was organised around. When Marika shattered it, she removed the centre of everything. What the game is about, at its deepest structural level, is what you do with a world whose centre is gone. Do you put the centre back? Do you replace it with a different centre? Do you decide the world can manage without one? Every demigod answered this question through their own nature. Radahn held things in place by force. Ranni replaced the centre with something of her own making. Morgott defended the memory of it. Mog tried to grow a new one around himself and Miquella. Godrick grafted pieces together, trying to make himself large enough to fill the space. And you, the Tarnished, arrive at the end of all of their stories and make a choice about what the answer is. Not because you are the most powerful or the most wise, because you kept going. Because exile and death and the long road back did not stop you. That is the only credential the game requires. Not virtue, not bloodline, not divine favour, simply the refusal to stay down. The Albinaurics. There are people in the lands between who were made rather than born. The Albinaurics are one such people, crafted through a form of sorcery that the lore describes as an attempt to create life outside the Erdtree's normal processes. They are pale, their features smoothed as though carved rather than grown, and they exist in two distinct generations that look almost nothing alike. The first generation of Albinaurics walk on two legs, or try to. Many of them have lost the ability and move in a low frog-like crawl. They are gentle in temperament. You find them near the Liurnia region, near the lake, gathered in small communities or wandering alone. They are not aggressive unless threatened. They carry within them a half of a medallion, a secret kept among their people, and the reason for that secret and the violence it attracts is one of the quieter horrors the game distributes across its geography without announcing it. The second generation of Albinaurics are different in appearance. They are large, spherical in their lower halves, rolling rather than walking. They look, to a first-time player, like enemies before they look like people. Some of them are enemies, pressed into service by various factions, but the lore around them describes the same essential situation as the first generation. People made outside the system, never granted status within it, living at the margins of a world that does not have a formal place for them. The village of the Albinaurics, near the Liurnia Lake, is one of the more deliberately affecting locations in the game. You arrive to find it already attacked, already burning. The survivors you encounter are what remains after a purge that happened before you got there. The Golden Order's relationship to the Albinaurics is not described explicitly in NPC dialogue. It is described in the shape of the village and the absence of the people who should be in it. One Albinauric you can speak to, Albus, disguises himself as a pot and gives you half of the secret medallion when you find him. He is afraid. He has good reason to be. The information he carries would allow someone to reach the Halictree, the tree Mequella built in part as a sanctuary for people like him, people the Erdtree would not receive. He does not know whether the person finding him is trustworthy. He tells you anyway, because there is no other option left. What the Albinaurics represent within the larger lore is not simply a marginalised people in a fantasy world, a category the genre reaches for too easily without meaning it. They are a specific consequence of the Golden Order's logic. The Order's laws encoded who mattered and who did not. The Albinaurics were made outside that encoding and therefore existed in a permanent legal and spiritual void. They could not be received by the Erdtree when they died. They could not hold rank within the Order's hierarchy. They could be used by those within the system and discarded, and the system had no mechanism for objecting to this, because it had no mechanism for recognising them in the first place. Mequella's project at the Halictree was in part a response to this. He wanted to build something that could receive the people the Erdtree could not, something that would grow to hold what was being left out. He did not finish it. The people who came there in hope are now dying of rot in the branches of an incomplete tree. This is the lore's most sustained image of what it costs to be outside a system and to trust a promise of something better. The Silver Tears. In Nokron, the Eternal City, there is a substance called Silver Tears. It manifests as a silvery, mercurial liquid, and the creatures you encounter in Nokron made of this substance are called Silver Tears. They are shapeshifters. They can take the form of almost anything, including humanoid forms, including the form of other enemies in the area. Their mimicry is imperfect, but unsettling. The lore around the Silver Tears connects them to the Eternal Cities and to whatever experiment or project the civilizations of Nokron and Nokstella were engaged in. The Mimic Tear, one of the bosses in Nokron, is a silver tear that has taken the form of your character. It fights you using your own equipment, your own build, a mirror of what you have become by the point you reach it. Fighting yourself is a device the game has used before, but rarely with this degree of lore integration. The Silver Tear is not an intelligence that chose to become you. It is a substance that responds to what it encounters and becomes it. The question of whether that makes the resulting form a copy or something new is the kind of question the game plants and does not answer. The Eternal Cities were civilizations that the item descriptions suggest were seeking to understand or replicate the divine. The Silver Tears may have been part of that project, an attempt to create a material that could take any form, including divine forms. Whether they succeeded, whether the Silver Tears are in some sense a partial success or a byproduct of failure, is not made explicit. What is interesting about them within the lore is their relationship to identity. Everything in Elden Ring is in some sense a copy or a fragment of something else. The Tarnished are copies of the great warriors of the Order's founding. The great runes are fragments of the Elden Ring. The demigods carry pieces of Marika in them. The silver tears literalize this theme. They are beings of pure imitation, without original form, taking their shape entirely from what they encounter. The horror of the mimic tear is not that it looks like you. It is that it is you, completely, except for whatever is inside you that chose to come here. The sealed tower of Stormvale. Before Stormvale Castle became Godrick's domain, it belonged to a different dynasty. The lore suggests the castle has a longer history than its current occupant, that it was a significant fortification before Godrick grafted himself into it as its lord. The stone of the castle is old in a way that Godrick's additions, the grafted parts, the new grotesqueries, are not. The original castle was built to hold and guard a specific geographic position, controlling access to Liurnia from Limgrave. Godrick's particular tragedy within this location is spatial. He occupies a structure that is obviously larger than him in every meaningful sense. The castle was built by people with a specific purpose, and it has outlasted that purpose, and is now the home of someone who represents its diminishment. Godrick did not build Stormvale. He inherited it, in whatever attenuated way the lineage works, and then proceeded to transform it into an image of his own pathology, filling it with the grafted and the captured, and the stolen. Walking through Stormvale is walking through layers of what the castle was before Godrick, and then what he has done to it. The older sections have a coherence that the newer grafted additions lack. The place where Godrick has most fully expressed himself is the most incoherent. The place where the castle's original architecture is most intact is the most structurally sound. This is not a subtle visual metaphor on the game's part. It is simply true of the space, and the truth of it is allowed to speak for itself. The spirit of Nephili's questline completing in some sense in Stormvale, with her eventually taking a form of stewardship over what remains, is the game's gesture toward the possibility of something better for the location. Not restoration, exactly. The castle is too changed for that. But purpose, a new one, imposed on the same space by someone whose relationship to power is different from Godrick's. Whether it amounts to healing or simply replacement is left for the player to decide. The minor Erd trees. Throughout the lands between, there are smaller versions of the Erd tree, golden trees of significant size that serve as landmarks and as sources of the same golden energy that the main Erd tree radiates. They are found in various regions, in Limgrave, in the Weeping Peninsula, in Caelid, in Liurnia. Each of them is associated with a church of Marika nearby, a site of worship oriented toward the Erd tree and the Golden Order. The minor Erd trees in Caelid are partially consumed by scarlet rot. The visual of a golden tree surrounded by the red dust and corruption of the rotted region is one of the game's more efficient images. The Golden Order's symbols are present in this landscape, but they are degraded, contaminated by what Malenia's battle with Radahn released. The Erd tree does not cleanse the rot. The rot has come into contact with the Erd tree's smaller manifestations and is simply spreading around them. This matters within the lore because it suggests the limits of the Golden Order's power in the current moment. The Erd tree and the rot are both expressions of outer god influence, the greater will and the scarlet rot god respectively, and when they meet in the same geography, the Erd tree does not automatically win. The Golden Order is not omnipotent. It is dominant in the way that a political and military power can be dominant while still being vulnerable to specific kinds of disruption. The churches of Marika near the minor Erd trees are, in Caelid, mostly abandoned or occupied by enemies. People came here to worship, and the rot drove them out or consumed them. The faith does not protect its practitioners from the rot. The grace does not create a zone of safety. The geography of Caelid is a sustained argument against the idea that the Golden Order's favour is sufficient protection from the things outside it. Patches. Patches deserves his own section, because he is, in some ways, the most honest character in the game. He is a thief, he says so. He is not pretending to be a hero or a quester or a servant of any greater purpose. He is looking for things of value and taking them, using whatever deception is necessary to do so, and he is remarkably direct about this once caught. He sets traps. He pushes people into holes. When you survive his trap and confront him, he apologizes, not because he has learnt a lesson, but because you are now a threat, and apologizing is the practical response to a threat. He has appeared in several From Software games, in various forms, always as a version of the same character. In Elden Ring, the lore around him includes details that suggest he has a genuine aversion to anything holy, that he is specifically uncomfortable around clerics and anything resembling organized religion, which is its own small statement about his history with institutions that claim to operate on behalf of higher powers. What makes Patches interesting within the lore of Elden Ring specifically is what his existence implies. Every other merchant, every other NPC with an established position in the world operates within some framework, some alignment to a faction or a tradition or a goal. Patches operates entirely within his own framework. He wants things. He takes things. He apologizes when it is strategically correct to do so. He is not interested in the Elden Ring or the demigods or the restoration of any order. He is interested in survival and profit. In a world saturated with people whose lives have been organized around the Golden Order, around divine parentage, around the question of what happens to the world's fundamental laws, Patches is simply a person trying to get through the day. He is small in the game's cosmic terms. He is also one of its most durable figures, the one most likely to survive whatever ending the player chooses, because his relationship to power has never depended on any particular power structure remaining intact. He sells things at the end. He has goods. He will exchange them for runes. This is, in the context of everything happening around him, almost radical in its modesty. The nomadic merchants, throughout the lands between, sitting at small camps with lanterns and wares, are the nomadic merchants. They are present in almost every region. They have goods that are locally specific in some cases, items that reflect the region's character, and they have dialogue that ranges from cheerful to deeply sad depending on their circumstances. They are members of a family, or something that used to be a family. The item description for cookbook items you can buy from them notes that the knowledge in them has been passed down through their lineage for generations. There is a network implied, a tradition of wandering merchants sharing knowledge and routes and survival strategies across the lands between. At least one nomadic merchant in the subterranean shunning grounds is clearly in distress. He is underground, alone, and his dialogue suggests he has been there for some time. He is not well. The isolation has done something to him. He still sells things. The transaction continues even when the person facilitating it is coming apart. This is one of the details that accumulates meaning slowly across multiple playthroughs. The merchants are everywhere, and they are fine on the surface, and some of them are not fine underneath, and the contrast between their function as game mechanics, as shops, as useful stops on the route from one place to another, and their situation as people is deliberately maintained without being dramatized. The lore does not give the merchants a grand arc. They do not feature in quest lines. They are simply present, selling things, surviving in every region of a world that has been breaking apart for a very long time. Their endurance is not heroic in the way the tarnished endurance is meant to be. It is just human, the continuation of commerce and practice in conditions that do not warrant it, because stopping would be worse. The bell bearings you can collect from some of them, by killing them or finding them after they are already dead, allow their stock to be purchased from the Twin Maiden husks at the Round Table Hold. The merchants are made optional in this way. You can carry what they knew without carrying them. This is practical within the game's systems and quietly terrible as a piece of lore. the reduction of a person's specific knowledge to a transferable item, the merchant surviving, as a catalogue after ceasing to survive as a person. The twin maiden husks. The twin maiden husks sit at the round table hold, motionless, covered in a pale crust, accepting bell bearings and offering what the merchants who carried them knew. They are two bodies fused together, or two maidens who have become something other than what they were, and the lore around them is deliberately sparse. Maidens are figures connected to the two fingers in the Golden Order's structure. A maiden is meant to guide a tarnished, to offer them the ability to level up through the Erdtree's grace, to be a kind of intermediary between the divine system and the individual person navigating it. Malenia is your maiden, in the game's terms, though she is an unusual case. The twin maiden husks have ceased to be maidens in any active sense. They are a residue of that function, available at the round table hold as a service, accepting what you bring and offering what they hold. Their dialogue, such as it is repetitive and formal and does not vary. They have become, through whatever process made them what they are, purely functional. Not dead exactly. Not alive in a way that resembles anyone else at the round table hold. There is something in their presence that points toward the fate of those who serve the system, past the point where the system can maintain them. The maidens who lose their tarnished, whose charge dies permanently, or whose purpose ends, do not simply move on to other lives. The lore does not describe what happens to them in any detail. The twin maiden husks are a possible answer, or one possible answer, to the question of what becomes of people when the structure they existed within no longer needs what they were. They are also, practically, useful. They buy and sell. They receive. They provide. The horror of what they have become does not prevent them from functioning, which is consistent with how the game treats the relationship between what something is and what it does. Being terrible and being useful are not mutually exclusive in the lands between. They are frequently the same thing. Kenneth Haight. Kenneth Haight is a minor NPC who appears early in the game, standing on a broken bridge in Limgrave, calling for someone to clear out a fort that has been taken over by enemies. He is imperious. He is confident in his lineage and his entitlement to deference. He is, in short, exactly what the lesser nobility of the Golden Order looks like in practice. He wants Fort Haight cleared, because it is his fort, by inheritance, and he wants it back. He does not expect to participate in the clearing. He expects you, a tarnished with no established status, to do it on his behalf while he waits on the bridge. He thanks you when it is done with the tone of someone who has received their due rather than someone who has received a favour. His questline, if it can be called that, eventually reveals that he has some awareness of his own position in the larger scheme of things, and that this awareness is not entirely comfortable for him. He makes a choice at the end of it that contradicts the assumptions his initial presentation creates, which is the game's way of noting that even the people who wear their entitlement most visibly are more complicated than their entitlement. But the more interesting function he serves is as a data point in the picture of what the Golden Order's social structure produced in its ordinary, non-demigod tier. There are demigods, and there are tarnished, and there is everyone in between, and Kenneth Haight represents the middle layer, the people who inherited position within the Order's hierarchy, who had enough status to have a fort and a name, but not enough to matter to anyone with real power. He is consequential in a very local sense, and inconsequential in every other sense, and he is not entirely aware of which is which. The demi-humans. In various regions of the lands between, particularly in caves and ruins along the coasts, and in the more remote areas, are the demi-humans. They are small, hunched, with large eyes, and a posture that suggests an evolutionary path away from whatever humanity the Golden Order defines as normal. They travel in groups, They use crude weapons. They have a chief. Always a larger individual whose death typically destabilizes the group. The item descriptions for demi-human items and the dialogue of NPCs who mention them place them in the category of creatures that exist at the edge of the Golden Orders. Recognition. Not the absolute outside, the way the Albinaurics or the Omens are pushed outside, more like the far periphery, where the Order's rules apply in a theoretical sense, but in practice no one is paying attention to enforce them. There is a demi-human queen, a boss you can encounter in several locations who has more evident intelligence and agency than the smaller demi-humans around her. She wears clothing, she uses sorcery, she leads her community with something that resembles deliberate strategy. Whether the demi-humans are understood as people by the Golden Order, whether they could be integrated into it if the Order had different values, is a question the game poses by showing you their social structures without providing a clear answer. They are, in most players' experience, primarily a low-level enemy type, a thing you fight in the early game before encountering larger challenges. The ease with which they are dispatched, the frequency with which they appear, makes them easy to dismiss. The lore asks, quietly, whether dismissing them is a habit you are importing from the Golden Order itself, whether the ease of that dismissal says something about what you are. Being trained to see as significant. This is characteristic of how Elden Ring uses its enemy design. The things you kill most easily are not necessarily the things that matter least. The world is full of communities that the dominant culture treated as insignificant, and in walking through it as a tarnished, you are constantly making choices about what you stop to look at and what you pass through without looking. Limgrave and the first steps. Limgrave is where most players begin. It is the first region, the starting area, the place where the game establishes what kind of game this is going to be. It is also, within the lore, a region with a specific history that the player is placed inside without being told what that history is. The ruins in Limgrave are not decorative. Each one is the remnant of something. The stranded graveyard at the very beginning, a tutorial area embedded in a cliff, is already a place of endings. The grace there is the first you encounter, and it points outwards toward the lands between in a way that establishes the basic visual grammar of the game's progression. The beaches of Limgrave are guarded by soldiers with no commanding officer, automatons of the Order continuing their patrol, because they were told to patrol and nothing has told them to stop. They are not hostile in any personal sense. They are simply present, and you are in their patrol zone, and so the violence is procedural rather than motivated. The gatefront ruins mark the edge of what was once a controlled border between Limgrave and the space beyond. The gate does not function anymore, the border is not enforced, but the ruins of the enforcement infrastructure are still there, and the soldiers who were placed there to man it are still there, still doing what they were doing when the world was different, because there is no mechanism to inform them that the world has changed. This is repeated throughout Limgrave and across the wider lands between. Soldiers and guards and watchmen continuing functions whose context has dissolved. The persistence of these patterns is not simply a gameplay convenience, a way of populating the world with enemies. It is a statement about institutional inertia, about what happens when the people doing a job outlast the reason the job was created. The Golden Order is gone in any meaningful sense of an active governing power, but its employees, the things it set in motion, are still going. The mechanisms outlast the intention. The Weeping Peninsula. South of Limgrave, across a bridge, is the Weeping Peninsula. It rains there, steadily, and the name is honest about the atmosphere. It is a smaller region, a detour for players who want to explore rather than a critical path, but the lore it contains is specific. The Castle Morn sits at the southern tip of the peninsula, and it is occupied by a rebellion. The Misbegotten, creatures with large wings and a leonine aspect, who are typically found as enemies, have taken the castle from the knights who were supposed to hold it. The daughter of the castle's lord, a woman named Irina, has fled and can be found on the road back toward Limgrave. She is terrified, and she has a letter she wants delivered to her father, who is still inside the castle. The story of Castle Morn is brief and sad, and the game does not editorialize about it. Irina's father is found, and he is not in a state to receive a letter. The misbegotten have been held as servants, as labour, within the castle. The rebellion is not random violence. It is a response to conditions. The lore around the misbegotten in various item descriptions suggests that their status within the Golden Order is similar to the Albinaurics outside the Order's formal recognition, used by those within it without the protection that formal status would provide. The misbegotten questline connected to Castle Morn has a resolution that involves a specific weapon, the grafted blade greatsword, made from the weapons of those who died at the castle, grafted together into a single enormous blade. The weapon carries in its description the history of what it is made from, a record of the violence that produced it. You can wield it. The game does not comment on whether this is appropriate. Leonine Misbegotten is the boss of Castle Morn, and defeating it is the conclusion of the questline in a direct sense. But the broader question it raises about the conditions that produced the rebellion and whether the restoration of the castle to its previous function represents anything worth calling order is left entirely to the player. The Perfumers and the Erdtree Burial Watchdogs. There are enemies in the lands between that are not warriors or soldiers, but specialists in a specific tradition. The Perfumers are one such group. They carry perfume bottles as weapons, using alchemical compounds, vapours that ignite or paralyse or corrode. They are found in the Altus Plateau and in areas associated with the upper tier of the Golden Order's social structure. The item descriptions for perfumer equipment describe a tradition of preparation and preservation, of the careful transformation of materials into compounds that have specific effects on living things. This is a kind of knowledge that exists at the edge of what the Golden Order formally sanctions. It is not sorcery, and it is not incantation. It is something older, more material, a form of chemistry in a world that has other ways of interacting with matter. The Erdtree Burial Watchdogs are stone constructs found in the minor catacombs throughout the lands between. They guard the passages where the dead were interred before the Shattering changed the relationship between the living and the dead. They have the form of cats, enormous cats of stone, with two heads in the most common form. They move in ways that stone should not move. They have been placed here, and they are carrying out their placement with perfect fidelity to their original instruction. They are among the oldest enemies in the game in terms of what they represent. The catacombs they guard predate the current era. The tradition of burying the dead that they were created to watch over is itself the remnant of a time when death worked differently, or was understood differently. They are artifacts of a system that the Golden Order modified, but did not entirely replace, still present in the underground passages, still watching, still guarding what was given to them to guard. That the catacombs are now primarily places of combat, the dead not resting in them so much as animating within them and attacking visitors, is another expression of the broader disruption of the death cycle. The places set aside for the proper processing of death are now places where that processing has gone wrong, where the dead have not found rest and the watchdogs that were meant to ensure peace are now the only living presences in passages full of the unquiet dead. The Golem Archers and the Giants. On the Altus Plateau and in the mountaintops of the Giants there are golems, enormous constructs of metal and stone carrying bows of a size that no human warrior could draw. They were built to serve a purpose that required something beyond human scale. Guardians of specific paths and territories, who could maintain a vigil indefinitely, without rest or morale. The item descriptions for materials gathered from golems suggest that their construction involved significant knowledge of metallurgy, and perhaps of something more. A process of animation that the current era does not fully retain the knowledge to replicate. They are artifacts of a craft tradition that exists primarily as inference from the fact of the golems themselves, rather than from any surviving documentation. The giants of the mountaintops are different. They are living creatures, immense and ancient, and the lore around them describes a people who had their own relationship with fire that predated the Golden Order's control of it. The fire giants, the larger ones, are the remnants of a civilization that Godfrey's campaigns destroyed. They were the keepers of the flame of ruin, the fire at the top of the mountains that the Erd Tree fears, and that, in one ending, is used to burn the Erd Tree itself. There is one surviving fire giant, the boss of the mountaintops region, and he is the last. Godfrey's campaigns destroyed his people and chained him to the mountains to serve as a living guardian of the very flame that his people once kept freely. He is the prisoner guardian of the thing that defined his civilization, held in place by the people who destroyed that civilization, made to serve the purpose of preventing others from doing what his own people would have done with the fire if they had been left to it. The fire giant's combat is one of the more unusual in the game. He fights with his own body, with the environment, with the fire. In his second phase, he tears his own chest open to expose the eye of flame within. This is not metaphor. The lore suggests that the fire giants carried the flame inside themselves, that it was part of their nature, and that the last one has been holding it inside him since his people were destroyed. He is not simply a monster. He is a wound that has been kept open. The runes and what they hold. The great runes that the player collects from the demigods are not simply power-ups, though they function as power-ups within the game's systems. They are, in the lore, literal fragments of the Elden Ring, pieces of the divine lore that was shattered and distributed among Marika's children. Each rune carries something specific about its bearer. Godrick's rune is described as granting the power of all great runes together, a reflection of his grafting impulse, his desire to have everything rather than one thing, even in the nature of what he carries. Renala's rune grants rebirth, which reflects her situation as a mother whose love has curdled into the obsessive need to redo and rebegin. Radahn's rune grants physical enhancement, which reflects who he was before Caelid destroyed him, a being of extraordinary physical power whose very body expressed his purpose. The runes require activation at the Divine Towers to become usable, and even then, most players choose to activate very few of them because the system is optional. The Great Rune Slot, the mechanism for actually using a rune's power, is itself a significant piece of game design. You carry these fragments of divine lore around with you, and you may or may not invoke their power. The choice is yours. The runes do not have preferences about being used. This is one of the more interesting structural decisions in the game. The great runes are treated as the central object of the quest narrative, the things everyone is fighting over, the fragments that define the Shattering and the war that followed. And then the game makes them optional. The player can progress to the ending without using a single one. The divine fragments that armies have fought and died over are, for the player, a choice about whether to invest in the system they represent. One possible reading of this is that the game is pointing toward the arbitrariness of what the demigods died for. The runes are real power and real lore encoded in material form, and also they are optional, and also the person who ends up with them can simply not use them and the world keeps going. The war that destroyed Caelid and drove Renala into grief and shattered Godwyn into a bodiless enormity below the earth was over things that turned out not to require the sacrifice they demanded. The Elden Stars and the beginning of everything. There is an incantation in the game, obtainable only through a long and circuitous process, called Elden Stars. Its item description is brief, but points toward the beginning of everything. It describes the Golden Order's fundamental cosmology, the relationship between the greater will and the world it shaped, not through the political and theological language that most item descriptions use, but through something closer to mythological language. The stars, the coming of the Elden Ring, the formation of the world around the lore it carried. The Elden Ring was not always here. The lore implies that the greater will sent it, or that the Elden Beast carried it, or that the two arrived together. The world before the Elden Ring is not described in any detail. It was before Marika. It was before the Erd Tree. It was the world that had the fire giants, and the ancient dragons, and the crucible, and whatever the eternal cities were practicing in the underground. And then something arrived from outside that changed the terms. This is the deepest layer of the lore's history. The moment before the game's known world was the game's known world. The creatures that predate the Elden Ring, the traditions that predate it, the civilizations that had to accommodate or resist its arrival, are all more comprehensible when you understand that they were not the world's natural state. The natural state was something else. The Elden Ring was an imposition from outside. However beneficial some aspects of it were, however welcome the stability and the abolished death were to those who received them, the fact that the incantation exists, that someone encoded the knowledge of the world's true beginning into a spell, suggests that this history was not entirely suppressed. It was not easy to access. You have to work for it. But it is there, waiting. The creation story under the creation story. The version of events that the Golden Order's official history preferred not to center, the Scarlet Rot as a god. We have talked about the Scarlet Rot as a disease, as Malenia's curse, as the thing that destroyed Caelid, but the lore, in its item descriptions around the rot's spread and the creatures associated with it, treats it as something more. There is the suggestion, in certain descriptions, that the Scarlet Rot is not simply a biological phenomenon, but an expression of an outer god, a being with preferences and direction whose preferred form for the world involves the transformation that the rot enacts. The outer god of rot, sometimes referenced as the outer god of Scarlet Rot, is not given a name or a shape in any description available to the player. It manifests only through its disease. But the disease has a direction. It spreads. It transforms. The things consumed by it are not simply destroyed. They are changed into something that the rot has a use for. The kindred of rot, the insect-like creatures found in Caelid, are one expression of what the rot transforms things into. They have their own ecosystem within the rot. They are not dying of it, they are products of it. Malenia's relationship to the outer god of rot is therefore complicated in a way that the surface description of her curse does not capture. She is not simply infected by a disease. She is, potentially, a vessel for an outer god, in the same way that Marika was a vessel for the greater will. The rot lives in her, and she contains it, and the moments when she cannot contain it are the moments when the outer god's will expresses itself most fully. Whether Malenia knows this, whether she understands herself as a potential divine vessel rather than simply a cursed warrior, is not made clear by the available dialogue. She describes herself in terms of her fighting ability, her devotion to Miquella, her defeat of Radahn. She does not describe herself in theological terms. But the lore around her, the item descriptions associated with her power and her final form, suggests a deeper dimension to her situation that she may or may not have access to. The fullest blooming of the rot in her second phase, the transformation into something winged and vast, is described in terms that connect it to the outer god rather than simply to the disease. It is not the disease at maximum severity, it is the outer god at maximum expression. And it looks, in certain visual particulars, like a dark mirror of the Erd Tree, which is the greater will's preferred form. Two outer gods, two expressions, one golden and one scarlet, facing each other across the landscape of the lands between. The fell god and the giant's flame. Before Godfrey's campaigns subdued the fire giants, they worshipped something called the fell god. The lore around the flame of ruin and the fire giant boss includes descriptions that gesture toward this deity, an entity associated with the fire the giants kept and with a form of worship that the Golden Order considered dangerous enough to require the destruction of the entire civilization that practiced it. The fell god is not an outer god in the same sense as the greater will or the scarlet rot. The lore is not specific about its nature, but the fire it was associated with, the flame of ruin, is real and present, and possesses a quality that the Erd Tree finds threatening. This is significant because the Erd Tree does not find many things threatening. It is the organizing principle of an entire world. For it to have something it fears, something it required a genocide to contain, points toward the fell god as a force with genuine metaphysical weight. The surviving fire giant's role as a guardian of the flame he is chained to, the last of his people, is legible differently in this context. He is not simply a remnant enemy. He is the last priest of a god the Golden Order could not destroy, only contain. The flame of ruin is still burning at the top of the mountains. The fell god, whatever it is still associated with it. The genocide did not end the story. It paused it, held it at the mountaintops, kept it in check through the one survivor who was chained to the very thing he would have worshipped freely.